In the unforgiving Texas Caprock, vengeance isn't just a promise. It's a blood debt. Rough justice. Chapter 1. You strip that wire, the county boys put you in Huntsville. The old man dropped the bolt cutters. The heavy steel tools clanged against the cracked concrete of the abandoned Texaco pump island. He wiped his hands down the front of grease-stained Carhartt overalls. County boys avoid this stretch, the old man said. Nobody comes out this far. Except ghosts and fools. Mercer Sample kept his hands resting on the steering wheel of the Ford Raptor. He let the twin-turbo V6 idle. The engine purred, a deep menacing thrum that vibrated the bullet-pocked doors. The air conditioning fought a losing battle against the midday sun baking the cab. Which one am I? Sample asked. You drive a truck with Mexican plates and body damage, the old man said. You wear a tin star you scratched the silver off of. You figure it out. Sample put the Raptor in park. He stepped out. The Texas heat hit him like a physical blow, a solid wall of temperature that sucked the moisture right out of his eyes. The air tasted of ozone and baked dust. He wore faded denim and a canvas jacket that hid the Glock 17 sitting snug in a Kydex holster on his right hip. I need 3 black Suburbans, Sample said. They passed through, the old man said. When? Sunup. Pushing 80 on a dirt track. They stop here. Long enough to piss and throw a tequila bottle at the pumps, the old man said. He pointed a dirt-caked finger toward the west. Took the Caliche Road toward the Caprock. You see the driver? Saw one. Young kid. Tattoos on his neck. Looked like a spider web. He kept a short-barrel rifle tucked between the seats. You see anyone else? Sample asked. The question hung heavy in the dead air. The old man looked at his steel-toed boots. He shook his head. I mind my business. Copper wire is my business. Sample reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded $50 bill. He held it out, letting the wind catch the edge of the paper. I need to know what you saw. The old man looked at the money. He snatched it. He folded it into a tight square and shoved it deep into his overalls. I saw a face in the back window, the old man said. Just a flash. They had the glass tinted black, limo style, but the sun caught it. A face, Sample prompted. A little girl. Maybe 7, 8 years old. Pale. Terrified. She slapped the glass. The kid with the tattoos backhanded her. The truck swerved, corrected, then kept going. Sample felt the cold knot tighten in his gut. It formed a hard, dense rock beneath his ribs. They go toward the canyon? Sample asked. Straight for the drop-off, the old man said. You follow them down there, you leave the world behind. Chato owns that dead zone. That makes 2 of us. Sample climbed back in the Raptor. He put the truck in gear. He left the old man standing in the dust, searching for more copper wire. He drove west. The Caliche Road glared white under the noon sun. The landscape offered zero comfort. Rusted oil derricks stood like skeletal sentinels against a bleached sky. Mesquite bushes clawed at the arid soil. 10 miles later, the road vanished. The earth dropped away into a jagged, purple bruise of shadow. The Caprock Canyon. Sample killed the ignition. He grabbed the Daniel Defense V7 from the passenger seat. He racked the charging handle. The bolt seated a 5.56 round with a satisfying metallic snap. The suppressor added 8 inches to the barrel, turning the weapon into a precision tool. He slung the rifle across his chest. He opened the door and stepped to the edge of the canyon. The silence pressed against his eardrums. He looked at the ground. No hoofprints. This century demanded rubber and steel. He found the tire tracks. Goodyear Wrangler MT-Rs. Deep, aggressive treads designed to chew through mud and rock. Kevlar-reinforced sidewalls. The cartel favored them for their armored vehicles. Sample crouched. He touched the edge of a track. The dirt crumbled. The edges remained sharp. 2 hours, Sample said aloud. The wind snatched the words. He studied the ruts. 3 sets of dual tracks. They moved in a staggered formation, keeping distance to avoid blinding the trailing driver with dust. Chato enforced discipline. He moved along the rim, reading the story written in the caliche. The lead vehicle slowed here. The driver braked. The anti-lock brakes stuttered, leaving dashed lines in the dirt. Sample walked to the spot. He saw a glint of black plastic half buried in a patch of scrub grass. He kicked it loose with his boot. A burner phone. A cheap, prepaid model. Smashed. Sample picked it up. He examined the shattered screen. Someone crushed it under a heavy heel. They removed the SIM card. They purged the connection to the outside world. Chato trusted no technology he could not control. He scrubbed his digital footprint at the edge of the cellular dead zone. Sample dropped the broken plastic into his pocket. He walked a wider circle. The wind picked up, swirling red dust around his ankles. The center Suburban stopped near a cluster of dead willows. The heavy armor compressed the suspension, pushing the tires deeper into the soft earth. Sample knelt by the passenger side tracks. He saw a tiny speck of white. It rested on top of a crushed leaf. It caught the harsh sunlight, throwing off an iridescent sheen. Sample reached out. He pinched it between his thumb and forefinger. A button. Small. Round. Mother of pearl. The kind of button stitched onto a child's denim jacket or a Sunday dress. He rubbed the smooth surface. The thread holes showed torn, jagged fibers. The button ripped free. Sample envisioned the scene. The little girl, trapped in the back of the armored tank. The men with the dead eyes. She fought. She struggled against the zip ties or the hands holding her down. She twisted a button loose. She forced the window down a crack or pushed it through a door gap. She dropped it in the dirt. A marker. A desperate signal left for anyone looking. Sample closed his fist over the pearl button. The edges bit into his skin. He stood up. He looked down the canyon trail. The path narrowed into a steep, treacherous descent of loose shale and broken boulders. The Suburbans went down there. They carried the weight of cash, weapons, and human cargo. Sample walked back to the Raptor. He opened the rear door. He checked his supplies. 2 5-gallon jerry cans of water. 3 MREs. Extra magazines for the V7. A tactical, medical kit. He slammed the door. He climbed into the driver's seat. He turned the key. The twin-turbo roared to life. Sample engaged the 4-wheel drive. He shifted into low gear. He steered the massive truck toward the lip of the canyon. The nose dipped. The windshield filled with nothing but the rocky floor, 300 feet below. The Raptor crested the edge. The front tires slid on the loose shale. The rear end fishtailed, threatening to pitch the 3-ton truck into a roll. Sample cranked the steering wheel hard to the left. He feathered the brake pedal. He rode the slide. Chapter 2. Take the canyon path, they said. Save an hour. Mercer Sample muttered the words to the dust coating his windshield. The Ford Raptor's suspension groaned, absorbing a brutal combination of jagged limestone steps and deep axle-breaking washouts. The descent from the Caprock rim demanded undivided attention. One slipped tire meant a 300-foot tumble into the canyon floor, a fiery end turning man and machine into a twisted metal pyre. He feathered the brakes. The massive off-road tires chewed the shale, fighting for traction on the aggressive decline. The canyon walls rose on either side, bands of rust-colored stone stacking high to block out the afternoon sun. Shadows pooled in the crevices, cooling the air a fraction, but the heat radiating from the rock faces felt like an open oven door. The trail leveled out. The raptor plunged into a dry riverbed, choked with dead mesquite and stunted cedars. Sample rolled his window down. He killed the engine. The silence rushed back in to fill the void left by the twin-turbo V6. Then the other sound emerged. A low, vibrating hum. It sounded like a faulty power transformer buzzing behind a brick wall. Flies. Millions of them. The wind shifted, bringing the smell down the wash. It carried the dense, metallic tang of spilled blood, mixed with the chemical stench of ruptured diesel tanks, and the sweet, putrid rot of voided bowels. Sample knew that smell. He lived with it during his days hunting cartel ghosts through the borderlands, a scent that clung to clothing and ruined appetites for days. He unclipped the seatbelt. He gripped the Daniel Defense V7 and stepped out onto the alkaline dirt. He engaged the safety, keeping his finger indexed along the receiver above the trigger guard. He scanned the brush ahead. Nothing moved. The local wildlife understood the hierarchy of predators and fled long before the shooting started. A rusted bullet-riddled sign hung off a single crooked post reading Oasis RV Park and Storage. Sample stalked forward. He measured his steps, avoiding dry branches and loose gravel. He bypassed the main entrance, hooking a wide circle through the scrub brush to approach from the elevated flank. He needed the high ground to evaluate the perimeter. He reached a limestone shelf overlooking the basin. The trailer park sat in a bowl carved out of the canyon wall by ancient floodwaters. It resembled a junkyard, painted in crimson. 7 recreational vehicles formed a loose circle around a central fire pit. 3 of the trailers displayed severe structural damage from explosives. A corrugated metal roof collapsed inward, crushing a meth cook station that leaked strange blue fluids into the red dirt. Sample counted the bodies from the ridge. 3 men lay near the central fire pit. They wore tactical vests over cheap polo shirts, their hands clutching AR-15s and rusted AK-47s. Bullet casings littered the ground around them like brass confetti. They died fighting, but they died outmatched. 2 more bodies draped over the hood of a shot-up Chevrolet Silverado. A 6th man sprawled in the doorway of a pristine Airstream, his upper half inside the trailer, his legs twisted at an unnatural angle on the aluminum steps. Sample moved down the slope. He kept the rifle tucked tight into his shoulder, sweeping the muzzle across the shattered windows and dark doorways. He cleared the Silverado first. The men on the hood lacked faces. Point-blank shotgun blasts removed their identities, leaving hollow cavities swarming with insects. Not a turf war, Sample whispered. An extermination. He continued his sweep. The carnage revealed the tactical narrative. Chato's convoy rolled in heavy and hard, utilizing the armored Suburbans to box the smugglers into a kill zone. The cartel shooters deployed overlapping fields of fire, cutting the local crew to pieces before they could organize a defense. Sample rounded the back of the Airstream. He found the stash. The local crew moved narcotics and cash. Chato's men found the hidden compartments. They ripped open 24 kilos of cocaine, dumping the white powder into the dirt where it mixed with the spilled blood and motor oil. They fed bricks of shrink-wrapped currency into a burn barrel. The charred edges of $100 bills fluttered in the breeze. Chato stole nothing. He destroyed the product to insult his rivals, leaving a message of supreme disrespect. He possessed enough money and power to burn fortunes just for the sport of it. A ragged, wet cough broke the steady drone of the flies. Sample pivoted. He leveled the V7 toward a collapsed brush shelter near the perimeter fence. He centered the holographic sight on a shape shifting in the shadows. A man leaned against a rusted generator. He pressed both hands against his stomach, trying to hold his internal organs inside a massive exit wound. He wore a counterfeit Rolex on his left wrist, and a gold chain tangled in his sweat-matted chest hair. Sample closed the distance. He kept the rifle aimed at the man's head. "You bring a doctor?" the smuggler rasped. His voice sounded like gravel grinding in a tin can. I bring questions, Sample said. He lowered the rifle an inch. He checked the man's hands. Empty. The guy's pistol lay 10 feet away, kicked out of reach. Go to hell. The smuggler spat a glob of pink froth onto his own boots. You're beating me there by 10 minutes, Sample said. He crouched just out of grabbing distance. Chato did this. Why? The smuggler let his head loll back against the generator housing. His breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps. We tax the road, the smuggler whispered. We ask for the toll. He laughs. He tells his boys to show us the new math. He had a girl with him. In the back of a black Suburban. The smuggler offered a grim, blood-stained smile. He had two. A boy and a girl. White kids. Tied to the tie-down rings in the cargo area. They looked like ghosts. Sample tightened his grip on the rifle stock. He hurt them. He ignores them. They are currency. He sells them to the special buyers down south. High-dollar merchandise. The smuggler coughed again, a violent spasm that sent a fresh wave of crimson spilling over his hands. He left us a present. On the single wide. Go look at his art project. The smuggler closed his eyes. His chest stopped moving. The flies immediately descended, claiming the fresh territory. Sample stood. He left the dead man to the desert scavengers. He walked toward the long, rectangular single-wide trailer parked at the far end of the lot. The aluminum siding caught the sun, blinding him for a second. He shifted his angle, letting his eyes adjust to the glare. He saw the dog. Chato's men captured one of the local lookouts alive. They dragged him to the side of the trailer. They pinned him to the aluminum wall with a 4-foot length of rusted rebar. Sample studied the scene. The sheer physical brutality required to drive a blunt iron rod through a human sternum and puncture the metal siding behind him defied logic. They used a sledgehammer. The heavy tool lay discarded in the dirt beneath the victim. The lookout hung suspended 3 feet off the ground. His arms dangled useless at his sides. The cartel executioners slashed deep X marks over the gang tattoos on the man's face and neck, erasing his affiliations before ending his life. It stood as a monument to sadism. A billboard advertising Chato's absolute dominance over the region. Sample traced the tire tracks leading away from the single wide. The heavy Wrangler treads dug deep, gouging the earth as the armored vehicles accelerated out of the bowl, heading deeper into the Caprock wasteland. Chato possessed a significant head start, a private army, and zero moral constraints. A sharp, metallic scrape echoed from the back of the lot. Sample froze. He shifted his weight, raising the DDV-7 back to his shoulder. The sound came from behind a massive, cylindrical oil storage tank rusted orange by decades of weather. It sounded like steel dragging across stone. He measured his options. He could return to the Raptor and resume the chase, leaving the haunted RV park behind. But leaving an unknown variable at his back in a combat zone invited a bullet to the spine. He approached the oil tank. He placed his boots with precision, rolling his steps from heel to toe to eliminate the crunch of gravel. He cleared the edge of the curved metal, letting his eyes sweep the shadow cast by the towering cylinder. He found the source of the noise. A pile of garbage rested against the concrete foundation of the tank. Crushed beer cans, rotten tires, and discarded fast food wrappers formed a foul-smelling mound. A man sat in the middle of the trash. Sample kept the crosshairs centered on the figure's chest. He stepped into the shadow, demanding the stranger's attention. The man did not move to attack. He did not beg for his life. He simply continued his task, dragging a rusted piece of steel against a river rock, attempting to sharpen an edge that died a long time ago. Sample lowered the rifle a fraction, registering the impossible reality of the ruined human being sitting in the dirt. Time of Wrath. Chapter 3. The man in the trash pile did not flinch when Mercer Sample leveled the Daniel defense rifle at his chest. He kept his attention focused on the rusted leaf spring he gripped in his right hand. He dragged the jagged steel across the surface of a river stone. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Sample kept the holographic red dot centered on the man's sternum. The smell behind the oil tank hit him with the force of a physical blow. The stench of human rot mixed with stale beer and industrial decay. He stepped closer. The shadows retreated, revealing the full extent of the horror inflicted on the man sitting in the dirt. A tactical blade had carved a crude, jagged halo around the crown of the man's head. The butchers peeled the skin back, leaving a raw crimson cap of exposed bone baking in the Texas heat. The detached flap of scalp hung over his right ear, a matted mess of black hair and coagulated blood. The left side of his face resembled a dropped melon. The cartel men gouged his eye from the socket, leaving a dark, weeping cavity. Dried blood painted his cheek and neck, disappearing into the collar of a shredded olive-drab tactical shirt. He sat cross-legged. He wore faded denim and heavy Danner combat boots. Blood loss should have killed him an hour ago. Shock should have stopped his heart. He lifted the makeshift blade to the sliver of sunlight piercing the shadows. He tested the edge with a thumb missing its fingernail. "You bring a bullet for me?" the man asked. His voice carried the grit of crushed limestone. "I save my bullets for men standing up," Sample said. "I plan to stand up." Sample lowered the muzzle of the rifle. He recognized the man's bearing. He saw the faded ink of a specialized unit insignia on his exposed left forearm. He recognized the disciplined, mechanical focus that pushed past terminal agony. You learned that kind of focus in the Hindu Kush or the Sunni Triangle, not in the civilian world. "Who did the carving?" Sample asked. "The devil," the man said. He dropped the river stone. He kept his grip on the rusted steel spring. "He calls himself Chato. He left me to sing a song for the buzzards. A warning for the locals. You skip the singing." "I hate music." The man tilted his head. The movement caused a fresh stream of crimson to run down his neck. He ignored it. "They call me Kano. I track for the ranchers out here. Used to hunt high-value targets for the government. Now I hunt coyotes and rustlers." "Chato brought a whole pack of rustlers," Sample said. "He brought an army." Kano locked his one good eye on Sample. The pupil contracted into a tight, black pinpoint of pure hate. He took the border run. He eliminated the competition. He collected his toll. "He collected 2 children," Sample said. Kano nodded. The motion forced a grimace to his lips. "I saw them. White kids. Tied in the back of the armored rig. The boss man treats them like gold bars. High-dollar trade goods. I need to catch him." "You need to fix my head first," Kano said. "The infection crawls behind my eyes. I feel the rot setting in. I need fire." Sample backed away from the trash pile. He kept his eyes on the wounded tracker. "Stay put. Do not bleed out." "I control my blood," Kano said. Sample jogged back through the slaughterhouse of the RV park. He bypassed the corpses baking on the hoods of the shattered trucks. He reached the Raptor. He opened the rear passenger door and dug through his tactical supply crates. Standard trauma kits handled gunshot wounds and shrapnel tears. They offered nothing for a flayed skull. He found a bottle of Wild Turkey 101 bourbon tucked behind a spare tire jack. He grabbed a plastic shaker of Morton iodized salt from a box of field rations. He returned to the oil tank. Kano sat in the exact same position. He held a piece of a broken broom handle between his teeth. He bit down, splintering the aged wood. Sample knelt beside him. He unscrewed the cap on the bourbon. "This strips the nerves," Sample said. Kano grunted through the wood in his mouth. He braced his hands against the concrete foundation of the oil tank. His knuckles turned white. The veins in his forearms stood out like thick blue cables. Sample poured the high-proof liquor over the exposed skull. The alcohol hit the raw tissue with an audible hiss. Kano's entire body went rigid. His spine locked into a straight line. His boots dug deep trenches into the hard-packed dirt. The muscles in his neck strained against the skin, threatening to snap. He produced zero sound. He bit the broom handle in half. He spat the splinters into the dust. Sample popped the lid off the salt shaker. "Brace," Sample commanded. He dumped a handful of white crystals directly into the weeping eye socket. He rubbed the rest of the salt across the flayed crown of Kano's head. The chemical reaction scorched the nerve endings. Steam appeared to rise from the wound. Kano slammed the back of his head against the rusted steel of the oil tank. The impact echoed through the metal cylinder. He clawed at the dirt, burying his fingers up to the second knuckle. He rode the wave of absolute blinding agony. Sample stepped back. He capped the bourbon and tossed the bottle into the dirt. Kano slumped forward. Sweat poured off his face, washing tracks through the dried blood. He took ragged, shuddering breaths. The salt and alcohol combined with his own plasma to form a crust, sealing the open wounds beneath a brutal chemical scab. "You survived," Sample said. Kano raised his head. The madness receded from his remaining eye, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. "I survived the sandbox," Kano rasped. "I survived the ambush in the mountains. I survived today, so I can end Chato tomorrow." He placed his palms flat on the ground. He pushed. His arms trembled under his own weight. His left leg gave out. He caught himself against the concrete foundation. He forced his knees to lock. He stood up. He swayed in the heat, a broken machine held together by vengeance. Sample evaluated the man. Kano possessed zero combat viability in a sustained firefight. He lacked depth perception. He suffered from massive blood loss. He stood on the edge of a systemic shutdown. But he possessed the terrain knowledge. "You own a map of this dead zone in your head?" Sample asked. "I know every goat path and dry wash from here to the Mexican border," Kano said. He wiped a mixture of sweat and alcohol from his chin. "Chato drives heavy armor. He stays to the hard pack. I know his route." Sample pulled the Glock 17 from his right hip holster. He popped the magazine, checked the brass, and slapped it back home. He racked the slide, chambering a 9mm hollow point. He flipped the pistol in his hand, offering the grip to the ruined tracker. "You ride shotgun," Sample said. Kano reached out. His fingers closed around the textured polymer grip of the Glock. He checked the safety with his thumb. He tested the weight of the weapon. He looked at the piece of rusted leaf spring he had abandoned in the dirt. He kicked it aside. "We need diesel," Kano said. "Your Raptor burns fuel fast on the hard climbs. Chato punched holes in the tanks here. We find a working pump, or we end up walking." "I saw a generator back near the airstream," Sample said. "Lead the way." They walked out of the shadow of the oil tank. Kano limped, dragging his left boot across the gravel, but he kept the Glock indexed against his chest. They moved back into the sunlight, stepping over the dead men Chato left behind. Sample watched Kano scan the horizon with his one good eye. The tracker did not look for ghosts. He looked for targets. Time of Wrath. Chapter 4. "Clear vinyl hose hangs inside the shed," Kano said. "Back wall. Behind the collapsed meth cooker. You need a hand pump, or you end up swallowing diesel. It burns worse than the bourbon." Mercer Sample left Kano leaning against the bullet-riddled airstream. He kept his Daniel defense rifle slung tight across his chest and walked toward the ruined outbuilding. The corrugated tin roof absorbed the Texas sun, radiating heat like a blast furnace. Sample stepped over a puddle of viscous blue fluid, leaking from a cracked plastic drum. The chemical stench overpowered the smell of the dead men rotting in the dirt behind him. He kicked the shed door open. It hung on a single rusted hinge and collapsed inward with a hollow metallic clang. He found the hose exactly where the tracker promised. A 10-foot length of clear industrial tubing, complete with a rubber primer bulb spliced into the middle. Sample grabbed the hose and walked back out into the blinding glare. He carried 2 military-issue, 5-gallon Scepter fuel cans in his left hand. The heavy plastic bumped against his thigh with every step. He approached the massive Caterpillar industrial generator parked near the edge of the lot. The machine provided power for the entire smuggler camp before Chato's crew arrived to collect their bloody toll. The yellow paint chipped and peeled, revealing rusted steel underneath. "Belly tank holds 100 gallons, Kano said. He tracked Sample's movement with his one good eye. The Glock 17 rested in his right hand, the muzzle pointed at the dirt. The chemical crust of bourbon and iodized salt sealed his flayed scalp into a hardened, grotesque helmet. Chato put holes in their trucks. He ignored the generator. He lacks mechanical vision. Sample unscrewed the heavy metal fuel cap. A wave of diesel fumes rolled out of the dark opening, distorting the air above the tank. "Cartels move powder," Sample said. He fed one end of the clear tubing deep into the belly of the machine. "They move fentanyl. They traffic migrants by the truckload. Kids draw a different kind of heat. Snatching American children brings federal drones. It brings task forces with blank checks." He dropped the other end of the hose into the mouth of the first Scepter can. He squeezed the black rubber primer bulb. "Chato considers himself a visionary," Kano said. Sample squeezed the bulb 3 more times. The amber fluid crested the apex of the loop and rushed down the clear tubing. A steady stream of diesel splashed into the bottom of the plastic jug. "Visionaries usually end up facing a firing squad or dying in a bunker," Sample said. He watched the fuel level rise. "He split from the Sinaloa organization 6 months ago," Kano said. The tracker shifted his weight, favoring his uninjured leg. He kept his gaze locked on the canyon rim. "He calls the old bosses accountants. He calls them soft. They care about profit margins and logistics. Chato cares about empire. An empire requires capital. He cleans the slate here. He robs the local stash houses. He burns their cash to show dominance, but he takes their hard assets." Kano gestured toward the horizon with the barrel of the pistol. "He needs real money. He needs military-grade hardware. Manpads to drop the Mexican Navy helicopters. Armored personnel carriers. He plans to build a fortress in the Sierra Madres. You buy that kind of loyalty with a specific currency." Sample switched the hose to the second fuel can. A few drops of diesel splattered onto his denim jeans, soaking into the fabric. The smell immediately bonded with his skin. "The kids," Sample said. Kano nodded. The movement pulled at the rigid scabs on his neck. "He calls them ghosts. Pale skin. Light eyes. Specialty buyers exist in the Deep South. Politicians with terrible appetites. Old money families in Veracruz. They pay $1 million American for a ghost. He took 2. He rides with $2 million tied to the cargo rings of a Suburban. You know his business model because he held a seminar?" Sample asked. "He bragged," Kano said. The gravel in his voice hardened into a flat, emotionless tone. "He carved my head with a tactical blade. He gouged my eye from the socket. A man engaged in that level of work requires an audience. He demands a witness to his own greatness. He detailed his entire plan while he stripped the flesh from my skull. He wants the world to know the devil walks the Caprock." Sample filled the second can to the brim. He yanked the hose free, letting the residual fuel drain onto the parched earth. He screwed the caps down tight on both Scepter jugs. He hefted the 40 pounds of dead weight. He carried the fuel to the Raptor. The Ford Raptor represented a masterpiece of automotive engineering, stolen from a mid-level enforcer outside El Paso 3 weeks ago. Fox racing shocks, 37-inch tires, a reinforced steel front bumper housing a 12,000-pound worn winch. Sample unlatched the capless fuel filler. He tipped the first jerry can, pouring the scavenged diesel into the tank. The truck drank the fuel, swallowing the liquid with a steady, gulping rhythm. "He rides heavy," Kano said. He limped toward the passenger side of the truck. 3 armored rigs. A supply truck. 12 shooters. Maybe 15. They carry customized rifles. They wear level 4 ceramic plates. You carry a single rifle and a pistol. "I bring an element of surprise," Sample said. He tossed the empty can into the truck bed and hoisted the second. "Chato anticipates pursuit," Kano countered. "He expects the local authorities. He expects rival cartel hitmen. He plans for ambushes. He anticipates a logical response," Sample said. The last of the diesel emptied into the tank. Logic dictates calling the state police. Logic dictates setting up roadblocks on the interstate. We represent a completely illogical equation. Sample tossed the second empty can into the bed. He slammed the tailgate. "Get in," Sample said. Kano opened the passenger door. He hauled his battered frame into the cab. He settled into the premium leather seat. He kept the Glock resting on his thigh. Sample climbed behind the steering wheel. The interior of the truck registered at 130 degrees. The black leather burned through his denim jeans. He hit the push-button start. The twin-turbo engine fired, a deep resonant growl that shook the chassis. He cranked the air conditioning to maximum. A blast of superheated air hit his face before the compressor engaged and pushed a stream of icy relief into the cab. He shifted the transmission into drive. The Raptor rolled forward. The massive tires crunched over the scattered brass casings and shattered glass littering the RV park. Sample navigated around the smoking ruin of the meth lab. He steered the truck past the single-wide trailer. The dead lookout still hung suspended from the aluminum siding, pinned by the rusted rebar. The flies formed a dense black cloud around the corpse. They left the slaughterhouse behind. The trail widened, transforming from a dry riverbed into a graded caliche road utilized by the oil companies decades ago. The deep, aggressive tread marks of the Goodyear Wranglers stood out in sharp relief against the white dust. Chato drove 3 armored Suburbans packed with heavily armed killers and 2 captive children. He possessed a head start and superior firepower. Sample pressed the accelerator. The Raptor surged forward, eating the distance. The digital fuel gauge on the dashboard registered a full tank. "He follows the pipeline route," Kano said. He pointed his ruined thumb toward a rusted marker post jutting from the scrub brush. "It leads straight into the dead zone. No cell service. No ranches. Just rock and heat." "We catch them before dark," Sample said. "We catch them when the desert allows it," Kano replied. He leaned his head against the headrest. The salt crust on his skull scraped against the black leather. He closed his single eye. Sample kept his hands at 10 and 2. He watched the tire tracks unspool before him. The engine hummed, burning the stolen fuel, carrying 2 broken men deeper into the wasteland. Time of wrath. Chapter 5. They halted. Kano pointed a blood-crusted finger toward a depression in the landscape ahead. Mercer Sample tapped the brakes. The Ford Raptor decelerated, the massive tires biting into the caliche dust. The truck slid to a stop, the front suspension diving and rebounding with a metallic groan. Dust overtook the cab, swirling around the hood before the West Texas wind sheared it away. Sample shifted the transmission into park. He surveyed the terrain through the bug-splattered windshield. The earth dipped into a wide, shallow basin. Flash floods carved this geometry 1,000 years ago. The sun baked the top crust into a brittle shell, but the layer beneath retained a treacherous alkaline softness. A trap for heavy steel. Bathroom break, Sample said. Suspension check, Kano countered. You drive armored Suburbans over this washboard, you shear control arms. You snap tie rods. Chato runs a disciplined crew. They stop to inspect the undercarriage. Sample grabbed the Daniel Defense V7. He opened the door. The heat rolled over him, a physical weight that pressed the denim against his legs. Kano shoved his door open. He forced his battered left leg to accept his body weight. He grimaced, a tight drawing of the lips over gritted teeth, but he produced zero sound. He kept the Glock 17 indexed against his ribs. The chemical helmet of bourbon and salt held his flayed scalp together. He looked like a casualty of a forgotten war, resurrected for one final mission. They walked into the basin. Sample kept the V7 shouldered, sweeping the muzzle across the stunted mesquite and the crumbling limestone banks. He searched for glare. A sniper scope. A pair of binoculars. The horizon offered nothing but baked earth and shimmering heat distortion. They reached the tire tracks. The convoy parked in a textbook tactical formation. The lead Suburban angled left, providing a barricade. The rear Suburban angled right. The heavy supply truck sat protected in the center. Sample studied the ground. The men left a footprint of pure arrogance. Crushed plastic water bottles littered the dirt. A pile of sunflower seed shells formed a small mound near the tracks of the lead vehicle. Someone discarded a spent vaping cartridge. Look at the ruts, Kano said. The tracker knelt. The motion cost him. His breath hitched, a sharp intake of air through his teeth. He ignored the pain and traced the edge of a deep tire groove with his thumb. Goodyear Wranglers, Sample said. Same as the rim. Check the depth, Kano said. Check the sidewall bite. Sample crouched beside the tracker. He examined the impression in the dirt. The heavy lugs of the mud-terrain tire cut 3 inches into the alkaline soil. The outer edges of the track dug deeper than the center. They forgot to air down, Sample said. They carry highway pressure in the dirt. They shake the teeth out of their passengers, Kano said. He pointed to the tracks of the center vehicle. Dual rear wheels. A medium-duty chassis. Ford F550 or a Ram 5500. A flatbed with a custom cargo box. The supply truck. Kano nodded. Analyze the suspension compression. The rear tires gouge the earth. The front tires ride light. The payload sits heavy over the rear axle. Cash, Sample said. The stash house money. Cash paper weighs a fraction, Kano said. The tracker sifted a handful of dirt through his fingers. They carry steel. Belt-fed machine guns. Ammunition crates. Slabs of body armor. Chato equips an army. He stole the local cartel's war chest. Sample absorbed the tactical reality. A supply truck packed with heavy ordnance transformed a pursuit into a suicide run. He faced a mobile armory. He stood. He walked the perimeter of the center vehicle's parking spot. He searched the ground near the passenger side door. The earth here fell in the shadow of a dead mesquite bush, shielding it from the direct hammer of the afternoon sun. The soil retained a trace of moisture. Sample spotted a depression in the damp earth. A footprint. He knelt. He studied the impression. A small shoe. A child's sneaker. Worn tread. The wearer stepped out of the heavy truck. The print dragged on the right side. She stepped out here, Sample called out. Kano limped over. He examined the mud. The men ordered them out to relieve themselves, Kano said. He pointed to a second set of prints, dragging alongside the first. The boy walked with her. They dragged their inside legs. Chato chained their ankles together. A short length of chain. They shuffle. Sample felt the rage flare, a hot spike behind his ribs. He locked it down. Rage manufactured mistakes. Precision required ice. He scanned the immediate area around the small footprints. He saw a glint of white. A tiny object rested inside the deep tread mark of a cartel combat boot. Sample reached down. He picked it up. A mother-of-pearl button. He pulled the first button from his denim pocket. He held them side by side in his palm. Identical size. Identical, iridescent sheen. Torn threads hung from the 4 tiny holes in the center of the new discovery. She dropped another marker, Sample said. Kano stared at the buttons. The tracker's single eye narrowed. She pressed it into the mud. With her shoe. She hid it. She hid it from her captors, Kano corrected. She stamped it down so the wind would ignore it. She fights. A ghost with teeth. Sample closed his fist around the 2 buttons. The hard plastic edges dug into his palm. A tactile connection to a kidnapped child. She possessed enough situational awareness to leave a trail. She understood the mechanics of rescue. She anticipated pursuit. She expects us, Sample said. Hope kills focus, Kano said. He turned his head, scanning the western horizon. A captive relies on hope. A captive stops looking for an exit and waits for a savior. She needs to look for a weapon. Hope keeps her heart beating, Sample countered. Hope keeps her ripping buttons off her jacket instead of curling up and dying. Kano grunted. He accepted the logic, but despised the sentiment. Chato runs a strict timeline. The mud crusts over in 3 hours under this sun. The edges of these tire tracks retain their shape. The dirt crumbles but does not blow away. We cut their lead, Sample said. They drive heavy armor. They drive a mobile vault. The weight punishes their suspensions on this terrain. They bleed speed. Kano turned back toward the Raptor. You drive a desert racer, built for the Baja. We close the gap. They stop again, we catch them. Do not underestimate the devil, Kano warned. He gripped the door handle of the truck. Chato does not run blind. He leaves watchers. He leaves traps. He wants you to catch his scent. He wants you to rush the corners. I check the corners, Sample said. Check the ridges, Kano said. Cartel snipers love elevation. They love thermal optics. Sample pocketed the 2 buttons. He slapped a fresh magazine into the Daniel defense rifle. He pulled the charging handle, verifying the chambered round. He walked back to the driver's side. He opened the door and climbed into the furnace of the cab. He hit the start button. The twin-turbo engine roared, shattering the silence of the dry wash. Kano pulled his door shut. The tracker stared through the windshield, a man composed entirely of scar tissue and malice. They possess the high ground, Kano said. We possess the fuel, Sample replied. He dropped the transmission into drive. He steered the Raptor out of the basin, following the deep, aggressive gouges of the Goodyear Wranglers. He pressed the accelerator. The truck surged forward, eating the distance, carrying the wrath of 2 men straight into the heart of the dead zone. The end. Want even more thrillers? Here's your copy of Tulsa Time. Chapter 6. Heat distortion turned the western horizon into a liquid mirror. The air rippled above the hardpan, blurring the jagged edges of the caprock into shifting, formless silhouettes. Mercer Sample killed the Raptor's engine. He let the truck drift the last 50 feet up the incline, coming to a halt just below the crest of a limestone ridge. He engaged the parking brake. The mechanical ratcheting sound echoed sharp and loud in the dead air. He unclipped his seatbelt and grabbed a tan Pelican case from the back seat. Stay low, Sample told Kano. The sun sits behind us, but a reflection off the windshield gives our position away. Kano offered zero response. The tracker opened his door and stepped onto the baked earth. He moved with a stiff, agonizing deliberation. His body demanded rest, a hospital bed, and heavy intravenous narcotics. He ignored the demands. He kept the Glock 17 pressed against his right thigh and limped up the slope, favoring his uninjured leg. Sample followed. He carried the pelican case to a flat slab of rock jutting from the crest of the ridge. He popped the heavy plastic latches. He extracted a Leupold Mark IV spotting scope and a compact carbon fiber tripod. He extended the tripod legs, locking them into the uneven stone grooves. He mounted the optics, securing the quick-release plate. Sample dropped to his stomach. He positioned his right eye behind the ocular lens. He dialed the magnification up to 60 power. He swept the glass across the basin below. Miles of nothing filled the lens. Scrubbrush. Arroyos carved by ancient water. Rusted skeletons of abandoned oil derricks. Then he found the dust. A thick brown column rose into the bleached sky 3 miles out. It moved north by northwest, a localized storm generated by heavy tires grinding pulverized rock into powder. Sample adjusted the focus ring. The dust cloud separated into distinct segments. He saw the vehicles. 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans led the procession. Dark-tinted windows. Heavy brush guards mounted on the front bumpers. They maintained a staggered, tactical column. A Ford F-550 flatbed brought up the rear. The supply truck carried a custom steel cargo box welded to the chassis. "I have them," Sample said. Kano dropped to his knees beside the tripod. The tracker placed his hands on the burning limestone to steady himself. "Read the pace." 40, maybe 45 miles per hour, Sample said. "They feel confident. They believe they own this territory." "They own the firepower," Kano said. "Distance creates confidence. We need to introduce friction." Sample shifted his gaze from the spotting scope to the Daniel Defense V7 slung across his back. The rifle chambered a 5.56 NATO cartridge. A devastating round in a close-quarters urban environment. A marginal round for extended long-range engagements. 3 miles sits outside the ballistic capability of this rifle, Sample said. The bullet drops into the dirt long before it reaches that convoy. We need to cut the distance. He studied the topography through the Leupold. A deep, winding ravine ran parallel to the cartel's route. Centuries of flash floods chewed a trench through the basin floor, creating a natural sunken highway hidden from the elevated sightlines of the surrounding ridges. "The dry riverbed to the south," Sample said. He pointed. "We take the Raptor down there. We run parallel to their flank. The canyon walls mask our dust signature. We push the truck," Kano said. "We beat them to the bottleneck at Diablo Pass." Sample collapsed the tripod. He packed the optics back into the pelican case and secured the latches. "We get ahead of them. We find an angle." They returned to the Raptor. Sample tossed the case into the back. He climbed behind the wheel and fired the twin-turbo engine. He threw the transmission into reverse, backing down the ridge to keep the truck profile hidden from the valley floor. He spun the steering wheel, engaging the 4-wheel drive, and pointed the nose of the Raptor toward the sunken ravine. The descent punished the suspension. The massive Fox racing shocks absorbed the brutal impacts of the uneven terrain, but the cab still bucked and pitched. Kano gripped the grab handle above his window. The tracker's knuckles shone white against his dark skin. The crust of salt and dried blood, holding his scalp together, threatened to crack under the violent motion. The truck hit the floor of the dry riverbed. The tires bit into the deep, loose sand. Sample floored the accelerator. The Raptor roared, launching forward. The trench walls rose 20 feet on either side, a corridor of red clay and exposed roots. They navigated the tight turns, the rear end of the truck drifting out, throwing massive rooster tails of sand into the air. They ran blind, trusting the canyon geometry to spit them out ahead of the cartel convoy. 10 minutes of brutal, high-speed off-road driving ended when the ravine walls began to taper down. Sample spotted a break in the embankment. He cut the wheel hard, driving the Raptor up the slope and out of the trench. He slammed on the brakes, parking the truck behind a dense cluster of towering mesquite trees. Sample killed the engine. He grabbed his rifle and a spare magazine loaded with heavy 77-grain OTM match-grade ammunition. He exited the cab. Kano joined him. They scrambled up a rocky incline, finding a natural depression overlooking the basin. Sample hit the dirt. He deployed the Harris bipod attached to the rail of the V7. He settled the stock deep into his shoulder pocket, finding his natural respiratory pause. He flipped the magnification lever on his Night Force optic to maximum power. He found the convoy. The black Suburbans rolled along the Caliche Trail, approaching a narrow gap between two steep mesas. The F-550 supply truck lagged slightly behind, the heavy payload over the rear axle slowing its acceleration out of the dips. "Range," Sample demanded. Kano squinted his single eye, judging the distance through pure instinct and years of tracking game across this specific dead zone. 900 yards, Kano said. Maybe 1,000. Sample processed the math. 900 yards stretched the absolute physical limits of the 16-inch barrel and the 5.56 cartridge. The bullet would transition from supersonic to subsonic flight before reaching the target, destabilizing the trajectory. "Wind?" Sample asked. "Full value from the left," Kano said. The tracker tossed a handful of dry dirt into the air. The dust blew sideways, a steady, relentless push. 10 miles per hour. Consistent. Sample reached up and adjusted the windage turret on the Night Force scope. He dialed 3 mils left. He adjusted the elevation turret, dialing in the massive holdover required to lob the heavy bullet across a half-mile of open air. He ignored the armored Suburbans. He ignored the shooters. He focused the crosshairs on the outside right rear dual tire of the F-550 flatbed. "I cannot pierce the armor," Sample said. He breathed in, letting his lungs fill completely. "I can pierce the rubber." "Take the leg," Kano whispered. Sample let half his breath out. He held it. The crosshairs settled on the black rubber, spinning in the dirt. He read the mirage rising off the basin floor, watching the heat waves dance from left to right. He applied 3 pounds of pressure to the Geisel trigger. The sear broke. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. The suppressor swallowed the violent crack of the expanding gases, reducing the gunshot to a sharp, metallic hiss. The bolt cycled, ejecting the brass casing into the dirt and slamming a fresh round into the chamber. Sample kept his eye glued to the optic, fighting the recoil to stay on target. The flight time at that distance felt like an eternity. Over a full second and a half of dead air. The bullet struck. The heavy match-grade projectile slammed into the reinforced sidewall of the Goodyear tire. The kinetic energy ripped through the steel belts. Through the scope, Sample watched the tire shred. A massive chunk of black rubber tore away from the rim, exploding outward in a cloud of dust and compressed air. The F-550 lurched violently to the right. The driver panicked, overcorrecting the steering wheel. The heavy supply truck fishtailed, the exposed rim grinding into the Caliche, throwing a shower of bright orange sparks into the air. The truck skidded sideways, coming to a violent halt inches from a deep drainage ditch. The 3 lead Suburbans slammed on their brakes. Dust engulfed the entire convoy. "Impact?" Kano said. A vicious, ruined smile touched the corners of his mouth. Sample watched the chaos unfold through the glass. Cartel shooters poured out of the Suburbans. They hit the dirt, raising customized AR-15s and AK-47s, scanning the ridges for a threat they could not see. They possessed zero idea where the shot originated. The suppressor masked the acoustic signature. The extreme distance rendered the muzzle flash invisible in the harsh sunlight. They panic, Kano said. They have to change a 200-pound commercial tire in the middle of a kill zone, Sample said. He folded the bipod legs against the rifle rail. He rolled back away from the crest of the ridge. They lose an hour. The heat cooks their patience. The foot soldiers start looking at the boss and wondering why they stopped moving. Kano nodded. He understood the tactical manipulation. You break the machine. You turn the wolves against the alpha. Sample slung the rifle over his shoulder. He started down the rocky incline toward the hidden raptor. We gave them a flat, Sample said. Now we find a shadow and let the desert do the heavy lifting. Time of Wrath. Chapter 7. You possess the rifle. You possess the distance. Kano struck the riverstone against the jagged edge of the brown glass. A sharp click echoed in the limestone wash. Sample sat on the tailgate of the Raptor. He dropped the bolt carrier group of the Daniel Defense V7 onto a microfiber cloth. He scrubbed carbon buildup from the firing pin with a brass brush. Distance keeps us breathing, Sample said. Distance keeps you clean. Kano struck the glass a second time. A sliver of brown material fell into the red dirt. You pull a trigger. A piece of lead travels a mile. A machine breaks. A man dies. You feel zero recoil in your soul. Sample locked the bolt into the upper receiver. He slammed the charging handle home. The metal engaged with a solid, satisfying clack. He wiped his hands on a grease-stained rag. I feel the results, Sample said. The convoy stopped. They bleed time. They bleed morale. Morale breaks the followers, Kano said. He raised the shard of thick glass to the fading sunlight. It began as the base of a Shiner Bock beer bottle, discarded by a forgotten driller in a past decade. Today, it resembled a jagged prehistoric teardrop. The leader requires a different touch. Kano rotated the glass in his palm. He ignored the sharp edges biting into his calloused skin. He dragged the heavy riverstone over the side, shearing off a microscopic flake. Sample watched the tracker work. The man's flayed skull baked under the late afternoon sun. The crust of salt and bourbon formed a rigid, grotesque helmet. The empty left eye socket remained a dark void. The single good eye fixed on the makeshift blade. I handed you a Glock, Sample said. Austrian engineering. 15 rounds of 9mm hollow points. It stops a man. A gun delivers a clinical death, Kano said. He blew a fine powder of glass dust from the edge of his new tool. A gun leaves a neat hole. Chato took my skin. He took my eye. He took the border, and he took those children. He deserves a messy exit. Sample holstered his pistol. He checked the extra magazines clipped to his belt. Steel knives do the job, Sample offered. You carry a fixed blade on your rig. Steel slices, Kano said. He ran his thumb along the serrated, flaked edge of the glass scraper. A bead of crimson bloomed on the pad of his thumb. He ignored the blood. Steel slides through the fat and muscle. It creates a smooth cut. Glass drags. Glass catches the tissue. I want to feel the resistance. Sample felt a chill climb his spine, despite the 100-degree heat radiating from the canyon walls. He hunted cartels for a decade. He witnessed the aftermath of their brutality. He understood the mechanics of violence. Kano existed on a different plane. Kano embraced the horror. You plan to skin him, Sample said. I plan to unmake him, Kano corrected. He tucked the glass scraper into a leather pouch on his chest rig. I start at the calves. The skin stretches taut over the calf muscle. I peel the skin toward the knee, like removing a wet sock. He bleeds out before you reach his waist. He possesses a strong heart, Kano said. He boasts about his stamina. We test it. We need to reach him. Sample slung the V7 over his chest. The convoy resumes movement. They mount a spare tire. They post guards. They send scouts, Kano said. He pushed his body from the dirt. He leaned against the limestone wall, favoring his injured leg. Chato lost a tire to a ghost. He hates ghosts. He sends his wolves into the brush to find the shooter. Sample grabbed a pair of Bushnell binoculars from the truck bed. He climbed the embankment of the wash, keeping his profile low against the skyline. He scanned the horizon. The dust cloud from the convoy remained stationary miles in the distance. Two separate plumes kicked thin trails of white powder on the periphery. They moved independent of the main group. You called it, Sample said, sliding down the embankment. Two vehicles. ATVs or light trucks. Taking flank routes. They run a sweep. They hunt the sniper, Kano said. The tracker touched the leather pouch, holding the glass blade. They find us. Sample reached for the V7. I dropped them from the ridge. No, Kano said. Gunfire echoes. Gunfire gives coordinates. We let them close the distance. They carry automatic weapons. We invite a firefight. They expect a man with a rifle, Kano said. He drew the Glock 17, checking the chamber, returning it to his waistband. He patted the glass scraper in his pouch. They expect modern warfare. We introduce them to the Stone Age. Sample looked at the tracker. Kano resembled a nightmare pulled from a shallow grave. We ambush the scouts, Sample said. We collect the scouts, Kano corrected. He limped toward the narrow mouth of the limestone wash. We take their vehicles. We take their radios. We leave the bodies. Sample kept the rifle ready. He drew the Glock. He followed Kano into the gathering shadows of the Caprock. Time of Wrath. Chapter 8. Heat rising from the salt flats distorted the horizon into a shimmering pool of fake water. A herd of pronghorn antelope grazed near a cluster of stunted mesquite trees, their tan hides blending seamlessly with the baked earth and dead vegetation. They possessed a nervous electric energy, twitching muscles beneath taut skin, testing the wind for the scent of diesel fumes and cordite. The roar of a supercharged Hemi engine shattered the fragile silence of the basin. A black Ram TRX crested a dune a half-mile away, its wide body stance and aggressive suspension dominating the fragile ecosystem. The cartel scouts drove with an arrogant disregard for the terrain, launching the massive truck off a sandy lip and crashing down into a patch of buffalo grass. Mercer Sample observed the intrusion through the Night Force optic mounted on his Daniel Defense V7. He lay prone on a flat shelf of limestone overlooking the valley, the rock radiating a blistering heat straight through his canvas jacket. They forgot their objective, Sample said. Kano knelt beside him. The tracker kept his single eye fixed on the black truck. They hunt us. But boredom creates alternative targets. Cartel foot soldiers lack the discipline for a slow stalk. Through the scope, Sample watched the TRX slide to a halt, kicking up a massive fan of red dirt. Two men occupied the cab. The passenger leaned out the window, resting the barrel of a customized, short-barreled AR-15 on the side mirror housing. He wore a heavy gold chain that caught the harsh sunlight. The pronghorn herd scattered. They bounded across the flatland, a blur of white rumps and slender legs, reaching highway speeds in 3 seconds. The passenger opened fire. He dumped half a magazine on full automatic, a reckless spray of copper and lead chasing the fleeing animals. Dust kicked up in a chaotic line behind the herd. One of the trailing antelopes stumbled. A 5.56 round shattered its hind leg. The animal pitched forward, plowing into the dirt, struggling to rise on 3 hooves. Laughter drifted across the basin, a faint, tinny sound carried on the hot wind. They ruin the meat, Kano said. A deep disgust laced his gravel-tone voice. They shoot for the noise. They shoot to watch something fall. "I need 400 yards, Sample said. He adjusted the magnification ring on the scope, dialing back to 10 power to widen his field of view. He checked the wind. A gentle cross breeze ruffled the dry grass to his left. "I dropped the shooter. You cover the driver." Kano reached into the leather pouch on his chest rig. He pulled out the jagged piece of brown glass. He ran his thumb along the flaked, serrated edge. "A bullet offers too much mercy for the man behind the wheel," Kano said. He drove the truck that carried the children. I smelled the exhaust on his clothes back at the RV park. Sample pulled his eye away from the optic. He looked at the ruined tracker. The salt and bourbon crust on Kano's head baked into a rigid, nightmarish helmet. "You want to close a 400-yard gap on foot?" Sample asked. "Against a man with a rifle." "I utilized the blind spots," Kano said. He slid his Glock 17 from his waistband and placed it on the limestone shelf next to Sample's elbow. "Keep the driver focused on the ridge. Give me 3 minutes." Kano slipped over the edge of the embankment. He slid down the steep incline, a ghost merging with the red dirt and scrub brush. He moved without displacing a single pebble, his boots finding solid purchase on the treacherous slope. He vanished into the shadows of a deep arroyo, carving a path toward the salt flat. Sample returned his attention to the optic. Down in the basin, the passenger pushed his door open. He stepped out of the air-conditioned cab of the TRX. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and walked toward the wounded pronghorn, drawing a stylized tactical tomahawk from his belt. He wanted a trophy. The driver remained behind the wheel. The engine idled, the deep rumble of the supercharger vibrating the truck chassis. Sample tracked the passenger through the crosshairs. He placed the illuminated red dot dead center on the man's chest, right over the sternum. He checked his watch. 2 minutes passed. He needed Kano in position before he initiated the ambush. He watched the brush behind the Ram TRX. A shadow shifted. A patch of dried weeds moved against the wind. Kano reached the rear bumper of the truck, pressing his back against the thick steel of the tailgate. The driver possessed zero awareness of the Reaper, crouching inches from his taillights. The passenger reached the downed antelope. He raised the tomahawk, preparing to deliver the finishing blow. Sample let half his breath out. He pressed the Geisel trigger. The sear broke with crisp precision. The Daniel Defense V7 bucked against his shoulder. The suppressor swallowed the violent crack of the expanding gases, reducing the gunshot to a sharp hiss. The 77-grain match-grade bullet crossed the 400 yards in less than half a second. The projectile struck the cartel shooter high in the chest, inches below his clavicle. The kinetic energy lifted him off his feet. He crumpled backward into the dirt, dropping the tomahawk. His legs kicked once, a final neurological spasm, before his body went completely limp. Inside the TRX cab, the driver reacted to the sudden death of his partner. He kicked the heavy door open and spilled out onto the dirt, raising a compact AK pattern rifle. He scrambled for the cover of the massive front tire, scanning the distant ridgeline, searching for the source of the invisible strike. He kept his focus entirely on the horizon. He neglected his immediate perimeter. Kano erupted from the shadow of the tailgate. The tracker vaulted into the bed of the truck, his boots hitting the spray and liner with a dull thud. He launched himself over the side of the cargo box, descending on the panicked driver like a predatory bird. Kano tackled the man to the ground. The AK-47 clattered against the limestone rocks. Sample watched the struggle through the magnified optic. He kept the crosshairs hovering near the tangle of limbs, ready to intervene, but the chaotic motion prevented a clean shot. The cartel driver possessed youth and uninjured muscle. He fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, throwing heavy punches toward Kano's ruined face. Kano absorbed a brutal strike to his jaw. He ignored the impact. He drove his left knee into the driver's sternum, pinning the man to the earth. The jagged piece of brown glass flashed in the harsh sunlight. Kano brought his right hand down in a vicious, sweeping arc. He drove the serrated edge of the glass scraper into the soft tissue of the driver's neck, just below the jawline. The crude weapon caught the flesh. Kano pulled hard, dragging the jagged glass across the carotid artery. The material refused to slice clean. It tore the muscle, ripping a jagged trench across the man's throat. A geyser of crimson erupted, painting the side of the Ram TRX and soaking Kano's hands. The driver gagged, his hands flying to his ruined throat in a futile attempt to stem the massive blood loss. His eyes rolled back in his head. The fight drained from his body in seconds. Kano remained kneeling over the corpse. He did not celebrate. He wiped the bloody glass scraper on the dead man's denim jeans and returned the tool to the leather pouch on his chest rig. Sample flipped the safety on the V7. He stood up, slinging the rifle across his back, and retrieved Kano's discarded Glock from the rock shelf. He hiked back to the hidden Raptor. He fired the engine and steered the truck out of the concealed draw, navigating the steep descent to the basin floor. He rolled the Raptor to a stop, bumper to bumper, with the black TRX. Sample stepped out into the heat. The metallic smell of fresh blood mixed with the sweet, sickening odor of the punctured antelope. Kano stood beside the driver's door of the TRX. The tracker's hands dripped crimson into the dust. He stared at the supercharged engine, idling under the hood. "They possess excellent taste in machinery," Kano said. Sample walked over to the dead passenger. He retrieved the customized AR-15 and stripped the magazines from the man's tactical rig. He returned to the trucks, tossing the captured weapons and ammunition into the bed of the Raptor. "We own 2 high-performance rigs now," Sample said. He wiped a streak of dust from the hood of the TRX. 700 horsepower. Fox active suspension. We cover twice the ground, and we split their attention. "They lose their scouts," Kano said. He opened the door of the TRX and climbed into the driver's seat, staining the premium leather upholstery with his bloody hands. Chato expects a radio check in 10 minutes. When he receives static, he realizes the ghosts possess teeth. Sample walked back to the Raptor. He climbed behind the wheel. "Let him worry about the static," Sample said. "We bring him the storm." Time of Wrath. Chapter 9. Cartel soldiers wear their bank accounts around their necks. Kano yanked the thick Cuban link chain. The yellow metal resisted, biting into the dead passenger's neck, before the heavy gold clasp surrendered with a sharp snap. Kano coiled the jewelry around his knuckles. The blood coating his fingers painted the gold a dull copper. Mercer Sample kept his distance. He leaned against the reinforced steel bumper of the Ford Raptor. He held the Daniel Defense V7 across his chest. The stench of punctured intestines and raw diesel saturated the stagnant basin air. "They trade those chains for safe passage when the cash runs out," Kano said. He dropped the heavy necklace into the leather pouch strapped to his tactical rig. "A desperate man trades gold for a gallon of water in the deep desert. We deny them the trade." Kano moved to the driver. The man lay in the dirt, his throat a ruined trench carved by the glass scraper. Kano ignored the catastrophic wound. He unclipped a black Motorola APX radio from the dead man's chest harness. The digital display glowed green against the harsh daylight. A secure, encrypted channel. A voice crackled through the external speaker. Harsh Spanish, laced with a heavy Sinaloan accent, filled the silence of the salt flat. "Cuatro, reporta. Cuatro, status." Kano stared at the radio. He pressed the push-to-talk button. He offered 0 words. He brought the radio down to the dead driver's chest. He squeezed the dead man's lungs, forcing a wet, bubbling rattle through the ruined trachea. He held the microphone inches from the gruesome sound. He released the transmission button. Silence dominated the frequency for 10 heartbeats. "Cuatro." Que carajo! Kano shut the power off. He clipped the radio next to his own spare pistol magazines. You invite them to hunt us, Sample said. I invite them to fear the shadows, Kano corrected. Kano reached back into his leather pouch. He retrieved the jagged piece of brown bottle glass. He knelt beside the driver. The dead man sported a large, intricate tattoo of Santa Muerte on the right side of his neck, just above the collarbone. The skeletal saint held a scythe and a globe. Kano pressed the serrated edge of the glass into the cooling flesh. Sample tightened his grip on the rifle stock. The tracker acted outside of tactical necessity. He engaged in ritual. He applied pressure, dragging the crude tool to separate the ink from the muscle. We own their vehicles, Sample said. The heat radiated from the limestone shelf above them, baking the words as they left his mouth. We possess their comms. Leave the meat for the buzzards. Kano ignored the instruction. He prioritized precision. The flayed skin on his own head stretched and tightened with every movement of his jaw. He peeled a 3-inch square of tattooed skin free from the corpse. He held the grisly trophy to the sun. The black ink stood out stark against the pale, bloodless tissue. He wore her for protection, Kano said. He folded the skin and placed it alongside the gold chain in his pouch. The saint failed him. I collect the failure. It carries weight. Sample studied the ruined man, standing in the red dirt. A shift occurred in the tactical geometry of the pursuit. Sample began this hunt as a lone operator chasing a cartel splinter-cell to recover 2 abducted children. He considered Kano a victim, a local tracker caught in the crossfire and subjected to unspeakable torture. He offered the man a Glock and a passenger seat out of pragmatism and pity. The pity evaporated under the unforgiving sun. Kano functioned as a weapon, stripped of its safety mechanisms. He abandoned the rules of engagement recognized by civilized men. He reverted to a primal state, a predator demanding absolute physical dominion over his enemies. He desired zero justice. He required annihilation. Sample recognized the danger. A weapon without a safety fires in any direction. You cross a line doing that, Sample said. Lines exist on paper maps, Kano said. He walked toward the idling Ram TRX. He opened the driver's door and gripped the steering wheel with his bloody hands. Chato erased the maps. He established the law of the blood. I embrace his jurisprudence. Sample looked at the 2 corpses bleeding into the alkaline soil. The pronghorn antelope grazed a mile away, indifferent to the human carnage. The Caprock consumed violence and demanded more. We roll in 2 minutes, Sample said. You take the lead in the TRX. Keep a half-mile distance. They set a static ambush. They hit the first truck. I provide overwatch with the rifle from the rear. Kano settled into the premium leather seat. He stared through the shattered passenger window, his single eye devoid of human empathy. They possess a 2-hour lead, Kano said. They anticipate our arrival. Drive, Sample commanded. He turned his back on the mutilated scouts and walked to the Ford Raptor. The twin-turbo engine idled, a steady mechanical heartbeat ready to push them deeper into the void. Time of Wrath. Chapter 10. The needle pegs the red line. Kano tapped a blood-crusted finger against the digital instrument cluster of the Ram TRX. Mercer Sample steered the Ford Raptor alongside the black truck. He rolled his window down. The ambient air temperature hovered near 115 degrees, a suffocating blanket of thermal energy pressing against the glass. Keep the RPMs low, Sample said. Let the cooling fans push the air through the radiator. The fans blow fire against hot metal, Kano replied. He gripped the leather steering wheel. The whites of his single eye showed red with blown capillaries. The supercharger generates a massive thermal load. The engine requires liquid. 3 miles, Sample said, checking the topographical display on his dashboard GPS. A solar-fed cattle tank sits in a limestone depression ahead. We top off the coolant reservoirs. We soak our shirts. We drop the core temperatures. Kano offered a grim nod and faced forward. They drove the remaining distance at a crawl, nursing the multi-ton machines over the unforgiving hardpan. The engines ticked and pinged, the metal expanding under extreme duress. The deep tread of the off-road tires kicked up a fine, choking powder that settled over the hoods, turning both vehicles a uniform shade of dead earth. The terrain dipped. A wide, shallow bowl, carved from the caprock, opened before them. A rusted windmill tower stood in the center, stripped of its blades decades ago. A modern solar array sat bolted to the iron frame, powering a submerged pump. A massive galvanized steel stock tank rested at the base, designed to hold 1,000 gallons of life-saving groundwater for the wandering beef herds. Sample coasted the Raptor down the incline. He parked 10 feet from the steel rim. Kano parked the TRX beside him. Sample killed the ignition. He opened the door. The stench hit him before his boots touched the dirt. He knew the smell of agricultural decay. A dead cow, bloating in the sun, carries a specific heavy odor that clings to the back of the throat. This smell carried an artificial chemical sharpness that burned the nasal passages and watered the eyes. Sample slung the Daniel defense rifle across his back. He approached the tank. A massive Brahmin cross steer floated in the center of the water. The animal lay on its side, the stomach distended into a tight, leathery drum. Someone slit the animal's throat from ear to ear, a deep, ragged trench that bled out into the reservoir. The water resembled an opaque black sludge. A thick, iridescent slick of oil and chemicals coated the surface, trapping a swarm of dead insects in the toxic film. Sample spotted a punctured, 2-gallon plastic jug, discarded in the dirt near the base of the tank. The faded label advertised a commercial-grade organophosphate pesticide. High-yield neurotoxin, designed to eradicate boll weevils. Chato poisoned the well, Sample said. Kano limped to the edge of the galvanized steel. The tracker stared at the bloated carcass. He displayed zero surprise. He leaves a calling card, Kano said. He anticipates our thirst. He understands the requirements of the machines. He murders the water to break our pursuit. Sample unlatched the hood of the Raptor. He propped the heavy metal open. A wave of superheated air blasted his face. The twin-turbo V6 radiated a localized inferno. He checked the translucent plastic coolant reservoir. An inch of boiling, neon-green fluid bubbled at the very bottom of the tank. The truck stood on the precipice of a catastrophic thermal failure. He walked over to the TRX. Kano had the hood up. The massive 6.2-liter Hemi engine clicked like a metronome. The coolant tank sat bone dry. Sample rubbed a hand across his jaw, feeling the grit of the desert ground into his stubble. The tactical geometry of the situation collapsed into a binary choice. If we pour that toxic sludge into the radiators, the pesticide chemicals eat the rubber hoses, Sample said. The sludge clogs the water pumps. We seize the engines in 5 miles. If we drive without coolant, the aluminum blocks warp, Kano said. The head gaskets blow. The pistons fuse to the cylinder walls. We seize the engines in 10 miles. Sample leaned against the burning steel of the Raptor's bumper. He calculated the odds. A man stranded on foot in this section of the Caprock faced a slow, agonizing death by dehydration. The sun baked the moisture from a human body in hours. The brain swelled. The organs shut down. Chato utilized the environment as a weapon of mass destruction. He eliminated the resources, forcing his pursuers into an unwinnable battle against thermodynamics. Sample felt the weight of the logic pressing down on him. The sheer, relentless malice of the cartel leader threatened to snap his resolve. "We leave the trucks," Sample said. "We load the remaining water into our packs. We hike out to the state highway. We flag down a commercial hauler." Kano turned his head. The tracker locked his single eye on Sample. "We hike away from the children," Kano stated. A flat, emotionless presentation of fact. "We possess zero options," Sample said. He pointed at the boiling engines. "These machines face imminent destruction. We push them, we end up walking anyway, but we do it 30 miles deeper into the dead zone with empty canteens." Kano reached into his chest rig. He bypassed the magazines and the medical gear. He retrieved the square of flayed, tattooed skin he took from the cartel scout. He held the grisly trophy out in the blinding sunlight. The skeletal image of Santa Muerte stared back at them. "The man wearing this skin required water," Kano said. "He required a heartbeat. I relieved him of those requirements. Chato requires a heartbeat. We travel to stop it. Willpower fails to cool an internal combustion engine, Kano. Fear cools the engine," Kano said. He shoved the tattooed skin back into his pouch. "Chato runs. He poisons the water because he fears the ghost tracking him. If we stop, we validate his tactic. We grant him victory. We abandon the children to the auction block." Sample stared at the toxic soup inside the cattle tank. He thought about the pearl buttons in his pocket. He thought about the pale face pressed against the tinted glass of an armored Suburban. He slammed the hood of the Raptor down. The metal latches engaged with a loud, definitive crash. "We push the trucks," Sample said. Kano slammed the hood of the TRX. The tracker offered a grim, bloody smile. "We drive until the pistons melt into slag," Kano said. Sample opened the door of the Ford. He climbed into the sweltering cab. He ignored the temperature gauge, glowing angry red on the dashboard. He fired the engine. Kano climbed into the Dodge. The supercharger whined, a mechanical scream protesting the extreme heat. They steered the vehicles away from the poisoned well. They turned their backs on logic and self-preservation. They aimed the massive grills west, chasing the dust cloud on the horizon, choosing to ride the machines into absolute destruction rather than surrender the hunt. Time of Wrath. Chapter 11. You enter this slot, you commit to the slaughterhouse. Kano's voice crackled over the captured Motorola radio, resting on the Raptor's center console. The signal carried a heavy dose of static. The towering limestone walls of Diablo Pass choked the transmission, bouncing the radio waves back into the dirt. Mercer Sample depressed the push-to-talk button on his lapel mic. "Chato committed us the moment he took the Caprock road. We ride the groove he cut." "He cut a channel designed to trap water and fools," Kano replied. Sample steered the Ford Raptor into the shadow of the massive canyon. The temperature dropped 10 degrees the second the truck crossed the threshold, leaving the brutal glare of the salt flats behind. The sudden shade offered zero comfort. The sheer rock faces rose 300 feet on either side, vertical slabs of rusted iron ore and bleached sandstone. They choked the sky down to a ragged blue ribbon. He checked the rear-view mirror. Kano piloted the black Ram TRX 50 yards back. The supercharged Hemi engine whined, a mechanical scream of protest against the boiling coolant and the steep incline. Both trucks operated on borrowed time, the temperature gauges pegged past the red warning zones. Sample focused on the terrain. The canyon floor offered a single, narrow track of pulverized riverstone and deep, treacherous ruts. Driftwood from ancient flash floods jammed into the crevices high above, marking the high water line. "Read the dust," Sample transmitted. "The dust settles," Kano answered. "Chato pushed his heavy armor through here. He cleared the bottleneck. He left the door open. A welcoming host." "A host with a roof," Kano said. "He positions his shooters on the rim. He owns the elevation. We own the bottom of the bucket. Sample rolled his window down the rest of the way. He rested the barrel of the Daniel Defense V7 on the door frame. He kept the truck creeping forward in low gear. The massive off-road tires crunched over the loose stone, a grinding sound that echoed off the canyon walls and magnified into a rolling thunder. He tilted his head back, scanning the jagged lip of the canyon 300 feet above. The harsh sunlight blinding the rim created a high-contrast nightmare. Shadows gathered under the overhangs, providing perfect concealment for a man with a rifle. "Do you see movement?" Sample asked. "I feel eyes," Kano said over the radio. They watched the heat signatures. A sharp, metallic ping rang out. The sound carried a distinct, terrifying resonance. High-velocity lead striking hardened steel. Sample felt the impact through the steering column before his brain processed the noise. A .308 caliber armor-piercing round slammed into the reinforced front bumper of the Raptor, cratering the metal an inch from the winch housing. "Contact!" Sample roared. He slammed his boot against the accelerator. The Raptor lunged forward, the tires scrambling for purchase on the river stone. The canyon erupted. The silence shattered under a barrage of heavy rifle fire. The snipers on the rim unleashed a synchronized volley. They possessed the high ground, the angle, and the element of absolute surprise. A second round punched through the hood of the Raptor. The bullet severed a high-pressure coolant line. A geyser of neon green fluid erupted from the engine bay, spraying the windshield with boiling liquid. "Thermal scopes!" Kano yelled over the radio, his voice cutting through the gunfire. "They see the engine blocks. They see our bodies." Sample cranked the steering wheel hard to the right. He aimed the massive truck toward a cluster of fallen boulders near the canyon wall. A third bullet found the cabin. The round shattered the passenger side window. The tempered glass exploded into thousands of glittering, lethal diamonds. The projectile crossed the interior, tearing through the headrest of the passenger seat, and buried itself deep in the B-pillar behind Sample's left ear. He tasted copper and glass dust. He drove the Raptor behind the largest boulder, slamming the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt, the front bumper kissing the ancient limestone. He grabbed the V7 and bailed out of the driver's door, hitting the dirt. He scrambled to the front of the truck, utilizing the heavy engine block and the massive tire for cover. He looked back down the trail. Kano executed a violent, evasive maneuver in the TRX. The black truck fishtailed, the supercharger screaming as the tracker threw the transmission into a power slide. Bullets chewed the earth around the vehicle, kicking up geysers of rock and dust. A round struck the tailgate, punching a jagged hole through the Ram logo. Kano forced the truck into the shadow of an overhang on the opposite side of the canyon floor. He killed the engine and bailed out, hitting the ground with his Glock drawn. "Status!" Sample yelled across the 50 yards of exposed riverbed, separating them. "I bleed from an old wound," Kano shouted back. "The truck takes the new ones." The gunfire ceased. The sudden quiet carried a heavier menace than the noise. The cartel snipers recognized the geometry of the kill zone. They possessed the targets trapped in a box. They opted to conserve ammunition and let the rats scurry. Sample leaned his back against the oversized tire of the Raptor. He wiped the boiling coolant from his face with the sleeve of his canvas jacket. The truck hissed and popped behind him, the wounded engine bleeding its lifeblood onto the rocks. He checked the angle. The canyon walls rose straight up. Vertical faces offering zero cover. The snipers occupied the southern rim, shooting straight down the chute. He pushed the barrel of the V7 around the edge of the tire. He searched the skyline through the night force optic. The glare from the sun washed out the details. He found zero muzzle flashes. He found zero silhouettes. A single chunk of limestone plummeted from the rim. It struck the hood of the raptor with a heavy thud, leaving a fresh dent in the metal. Sample pulled his rifle back. "They drop rocks," Kano called out. "They escalate the insult," Sample said. "They want us to peek." He popped the magazine out of his rifle, checked the brass, and slapped it back into the receiver. He possessed 2 extra magazines. 60 rounds of 5.56 to fight a war against invisible men holding the high ground. "How many shooters?" Sample asked. 3 distinct rifles, Kano said. "They stagger their fire. 1 shoots while 2 scan the thermals. They operate with discipline. Rear guard. They pin us here until dark. Then they rappel down and finish the job with night vision." "Or they drop a grenade into your sunroof," Kano suggested. Another rock fell. This one shattered against the boulder shielding the raptor, sending a shower of sharp fragments into Sample's shoulder. He grimaced, ignoring the sting. He evaluated the trap. Chato selected the location with absolute precision. The cartel boss left his best shooters to close the back door, securing his escape to the mesa top. "We need to blind the thermals," Sample said. "The rocks hold the ambient heat," Kano replied. "The trucks glow like signal fires on their screens. Dust offers 0 concealment." Sample looked at the boiling coolant pooling under the engine block. The heat from the raptor radiated against his back. They sat inside an oven, trapped by crossfire. He keyed the lapel mic. "I provide suppressive fire," Sample transmitted. "I saturate the rim. You make a run for the exit." "The exit requires running 50 yards of open ground," Kano said. "The exit guarantees a bullet in the spine. I refuse the offer." A heavy .308 round slammed into the roof of the raptor. The metal buckled inward. The sniper adjusted his angle, attempting to find a clear line of sight behind the boulder. "They possess the geometry," Sample said. He rolled onto his stomach. He extended the bipod legs on his rifle. He crawled to the edge of the front tire, exposing the muzzle and the optic. He found a jagged cluster of rocks on the southern rim. He placed the crosshairs on the edge of the cliff. He squeezed the Geisel trigger. He fired 3 rapid shots, the suppressor hissing in the confined space. The rounds chipped the limestone on the rim. The cartel snipers answered with a brutal, coordinated volley. Bullets rained down. They chewed the boulder shielding Sample. They shredded the remaining glass in the raptor. A round struck the cast-iron engine block, the impact ringing out like a cracked church bell. Sample buried his face in the dirt. The air filled with pulverized rock and fiberglass dust. They held the absolute disadvantage. The modern kill zone offered no parley. The snipers intended to turn the canyon floor into a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered bone. Time of Wrath. Chapter 12. The sun leaves us in 6 minutes. Kano's voice filtered through the captured Motorola radio, a metallic scrape buried in static. Mercer Sample crouched behind the shattered engine block of the Ford Raptor. He pressed the push-to-talk button on his lapel mic. Darkness hands them the advantage. They mount Generation 3 night vision. They utilize thermal overlays. They own the night. "Thermals require a temperature differential," Kano replied. "The canyon walls absorb solar radiation all day. The rock bleeds heat for hours after sunset. The background temperature matches human body heat. The optics wash out. The screen turns to white noise." Sample evaluated the science. The logic held firm. The limestone canyon functioned as a massive thermal battery, radiating 100 degrees of ambient heat into the gathering twilight. For a brief window, flesh and stone registered as the exact same color on a digital display. "We get a 30-minute blind spot," Sample said. "What is the play?" "I take the northern wall." Sample stared up at the sheer vertical face, rising 300 feet above the TRX. The rock offered 0 footholds. Wind and water polished the iron-rich stone into a brutal flat monolith. "You lack ropes," Sample transmitted. "You lack a harness. You lack the blood volume to walk up a flight of stairs, let alone free climb a skyscraper." "I possess titanium ascenders," Kano said. "I scavenged them from the dead scouts. Cartel tunnel rats use them to scale border infrastructure. I wedge them into the micro-fissures. I climb." Sample wiped a mixture of sweat and glass dust from his forehead. "You fall, you shatter every bone in your body. We lose the war." "I refuse gravity," Kano stated. "A flat declaration of absolute will. You own one job, Grey Wolf. You anchor their attention to the floor. You make noise. You become the center of their universe." The blue ribbon of sky above the canyon choked into a deep, bruised purple. The shadows stretching across the riverbed merged, swallowing the ruined trucks in absolute blackness. "Execute," Sample said. He dropped the empty magazine from the Daniel Defense V7. He slapped his second-to-last magazine into the magwell. 30 rounds of 5.56 NATO. He chambered the first cartridge. He leaned out from the cover of the Raptor's massive front tire. He aimed the rifle toward the jagged silhouette of the southern rim. He squeezed the Geisel trigger 3 times. The suppressor hissed, spitting copper and lead into the sky. The rounds impacted the limestone lip, showering the hidden snipers with pulverized rock. "Look at me," Sample roared. His voice echoed off the canyon walls, a booming challenge designed to enrage the cartel shooters. "You hide like cowards. You shoot like blind recruits." The southern rim erupted. Muzzle flashes strobed against the dark sky. A synchronized volley of .308 armor-piercing rounds rained down on the canyon floor. The bullets chewed the earth, kicking up geysers of stone and dirt. A round struck the Raptor's cast-iron differential, ringing out like a cracked bell. Sample ducked behind the tire, tracking the impacts. He needed them focused entirely on the kill zone. 50 yards across the pass, a shadow detached itself from the black Ram TRX. Kano moved to the base of the northern cliff. He held a pair of tactical hand ascenders, titanium spikes protruding from molded carbon fiber grips. He wore a matching set strapped to the toes of his Danner boots. He pressed his chest against the cold limestone. He searched the flat surface with his fingertips, feeling the microscopic variations in the rock. He found a vertical hairline fracture. He drove the right-hand spike into the crack. The titanium bit into the stone. He tested the purchase with his body weight. The metal held fast. He drove the right boot spike into the wall, a foot above the canyon floor. He stepped up. The physical toll registered instant, agonizing feedback. The muscles in Kano's back screamed, torn and battered from the fight with the cartel driver hours ago. The flayed skin on his scalp stretched tight. The rigid helmet of salt and dried bourbon cracked, weeping a fresh trickle of crimson down the side of his ruined face. Kano ignored the pain. Pain belonged to the living. He focused entirely on the mechanics of the ascent. Left hand. Left foot. Push. Reach. He climbed 10 feet. The darkness swallowed him, blending his dark tactical clothing into the shadows of the rock face. Down below, Sample broke cover. He scrambled across the river stone, exposing his silhouette to the southern rim for 3 terrifying seconds. He dove behind a massive piece of driftwood, lodged in the dry wash. The snipers tracked his movement. A concentrated burst of automatic fire shredded the driftwood, sending jagged splinters flying through the air. Sample rolled onto his back. He aimed the V7 at the brightest muzzle flash on the ridge. He fired a double tap. A distinct, meaty thud followed the metallic hiss of the suppressor. The incoming fire from that specific position ceased. "One down or one bleeding," Sample muttered to himself. He keyed the radio. "They track my movement. The distraction holds. Kano offered zero response. The tracker required oxygen for his muscles, saving nothing for conversation. 100 feet off the ground, the hairline fracture ended. Kano clung to the sheer face, his muscles quivering under sustained tension. He hung suspended over a fatal drop, pinned to the wall by 4 points of titanium. The wind howled through the pass, tearing at his clothes, attempting to peel him from the stone. He searched the rock above his head. Smooth limestone. 0 cracks. 0 purchase. He looked to his right. 5 feet across the vertical face, a narrow chimney offered a path upward. A deep fold in the rock, wide enough to wedge a human body inside. He needed to cross the gap. Kano locked his left arm, supporting his entire body weight on a single handspike. He reached across the void with his right arm, stretching toward the edge of the chimney. His fingertips brushed the opening, short by 2 inches. He needed momentum. He pulled his right boot free from the stone. He swung his leg, generating a pendulum arc. On the return swing, he released the left-hand spike. For a fraction of a second, Kano existed in free fall. He flew across the smooth face of the cliff. He slammed into the opening of the chimney. His right hand found a jagged edge. His fingers clamped down like a steel vise. His boots scrambled against the interior walls of the fold, finding friction. He arrested the fall. He hung inside the dark crevice, his chest heaving, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He did not pause to celebrate the survival. He wedged his back against one wall of the chimney and planted his boots against the opposite side. He shimmied upward, inch by brutal inch, utilizing counter-pressure to defeat gravity. 200 feet below, the cartel snipers escalated their assault. A heavy, mechanical thump echoed from the southern rim. Sample recognized the sound. A 40mm underbarrel grenade launcher. Incoming! Sample yelled, abandoning the shattered driftwood. He sprinted toward the rear of the mangled Ford Raptor. A high-explosive round detonated exactly where he lay 2 seconds prior. The blast wave punched the air from his lungs. A shower of pulverized rock and shrapnel rained down on the truck bed. Sample hit the dirt. He tasted cordite and copper. His ears rang, a high-pitched whine drowning out the wind. He checked the action on the V7. He possessed 10 rounds. He needed to buy the tracker another 60 seconds. He stood up. He stepped into the open riverbed, raising the rifle to his shoulder. "Is that your best shot?" Sample screamed at the ridge. "You miss a man standing in the open." He fired 3 rounds at the rim. The snipers adjusted their optics. They abandoned the thermal overlays, switching to standard light amplification tubes to cut through the thermal washout. They found the lone American standing in the dirt. Multiple laser sights cut through the darkness, painting green dots across Sample's chest and the side of the Raptor. High above, Kano reached the lip of the canyon. The tracker hauled his battered frame over the jagged edge of the limestone. He rolled onto the flat surface of the mesa, gasping for the thin, cold night air. His hands shook. His fingernails bled. The titanium spikes scraped against the stone as he unbuckled them from his boots and hands. He pushed himself to his knees. He peered over the rim, staring down into the black abyss. 50 yards to his left, he spotted the enemy. 3 cartel snipers lay prone on a flat rock outcropping. They operated with lethal precision. One man fed the belt of a heavy machine gun. Another adjusted the sights on an AR-10 platform. The third sighted down the barrel of a grenade launcher. They possessed absolute focus on the man standing in the riverbed. They ignored their rear flank. They trusted the sheer vertical cliff to protect their backs. Kano reached into the leather pouch on his chest rig. He bypassed the Glock 17. He withdrew the jagged piece of brown bottle glass. The serrated edge caught a sliver of moonlight. Kano rose to his feet. He stepped out of the shadows, a demon birthed from the stone, and walked toward the men painting Mercer Sample with lasers. Time of Wrath. Chapter 13. The spotter, adjusting the AR-10 optic, died first. Kano stepped behind the man. He clamped his left hand over the spotter's mouth, fingers digging deep into the cheeks to lock the jaw. He drove the right hand forward. The jagged edge of the brown bottle glass bit deep into the soft tissue beneath the ear. Kano pulled hard across the throat. The glass tore the carotid artery and severed the windpipe. The spotter thrashed. His boots kicked the limestone. Kano rode the man's back, pressing the dying weight into the stone, controlling the spasms. A hot, thick geyser of crimson painted the rock. The man operating the 40mm grenade launcher heard the scuffle. He attributed the sound to shifting gravel. He kept his eye pressed to the night vision monocular, scanning the black canyon floor for the American with the rifle. "Take the shot," the grenadier whispered in Spanish. Kano left the first corpse. He closed the 3 feet of distance. He gripped a fistful of the grenadier's tactical vest. He hauled the man backward, ripping him away from the weapon. The grenadier opened his mouth to shout a warning. Kano drove his knee into the man's spine. The impact expelled the air from the grenadier's lungs, turning the shout into a wet gasp. Kano brought the glass scraper down. He buried the crude blade in the hollow of the man's collarbone, driving it down into the chest cavity. He twisted his wrist. The serrated edges caught the subclavian artery. The grenadier went limp. Kano dropped him. The gunner feeding the belt of the heavy machine gun realized the silence carried a specific gravity. He turned his head. He saw his 2 partners bleeding out on the flat rock. He saw a nightmare wrapped in human skin standing between them. Kano's flayed scalp wept fresh blood down his face. His single eye reflected the pale moonlight. The gunner abandoned the heavy weapon. He scrambled backward on his hands and knees. He reached for the compact pistol holstered on his thigh. He cleared the Kydex holster. He leveled the muzzle. Kano closed the gap before the gunner aligned the sights. The tracker kicked the pistol out of the man's hand. The weapon clattered over the edge of the cliff and vanished into the abyss. The gunner raised his hands to protect his face. Kano ignored the hands. He stepped inside the man's guard. He drove the heel of his boot into the gunner's kneecap. The joint shattered with a sharp snap. The gunner collapsed, his scream dying in his throat as Kano grabbed a handful of his dark hair. Kano snapped the man's head back. He exposed the throat. He went to work with the glass. 300 feet below, Mercer Sample stared at his own chest. The 3 green laser dots vanished. The canyon swallowed the echoes of the heavy gunfire. The ringing in Sample's ears subsided, replaced by the rush of the wind cutting through the limestone chute. The air smelled of cordite and boiling engine coolant. Sample maintained his position in the dry riverbed. He kept the Daniel Defense V7 shouldered. He counted to 60. He scanned the jagged silhouette of the southern rim through his optic. 0 movement. 0 flashes. He keyed his lapel microphone. Kano. Status. Static hissed back. Sample lowered the rifle. Kano succeeded, or Kano lay dead on the mesa. In either scenario, the crossfires ceased. Sample abandoned the shattered Ford Raptor. He moved toward the base of the southern cliff. The cartel snipers required a method to descend and confirm their kills. They carried heavy weapons and ammunition crates. They did not free climb. He walked along the rock wall, letting his hand trace the cold stone. 100 yards past the kill zone, the cliff face fractured. A deep, natural fissure cut a 45-degree angle up to the rim. Sample found the anchor point. A heavy steel piton driven deep into a crack in the rock. A thick black static rope hung from the metal ring, disappearing into the dark fissure above. Sample slung the rifle tight across his back. He gripped the heavy nylon rope. He tested the tension. The anchor held firm. He began the ascent. He utilized a hand-over-hand technique, planting his boots against the rough walls of the fissure, letting his leg muscles do the heavy lifting. The climb demanded pure physical endurance. The air grew thinner. The temperature dropped. 10 minutes of brutal exertion brought him to the lip of the canyon. Sample pulled himself over the edge. He rolled onto the flat surface of the mesa. He unslung the V7, popping the safety off, bringing the stock to his shoulder. He scanned the plateau. The wind howled unimpeded up here. It carried a fine grit that stung his eyes. He followed the scent of fresh blood. He found the sniper nest 50 yards from the fissure. The setup occupied a commanding view of the entire canyon pass. The heavy machine gun rested on its bipod. The AR-10 lay discarded in the dirt. Sample found the bodies. They did not resemble casualties of war. They resembled the victims of an apex predator. Kano sat on an olive-drab ammunition crate in the center of the carnage. The tracker wiped his hands on a piece of dark fabric torn from the gunner's shirt. He held a black satellite radio in his lap. The green backlight of the digital display cast a sickly glow over Kano's ruined face. Sample lowered the muzzle of his rifle. He stepped over the grenadier. "You make a mess," Sample said. "I make a statement," Kano replied. He tossed the bloody fabric into the dirt. Sample studied the scene. Kano did not just kill the men. He dismantled them. He arranged the bodies in a specific pattern, their heads pointing toward the west, toward the deeper desert. He removed their tactical gear, piling it in a neat stack next to the weapons. "They failed to protect their flank," Kano said. He stared at the glowing screen of the radio. "They placed absolute faith in the vertical drop. Faith produces blind spots." Sample checked the chamber of the captured AR-10. He ejected the magazine and tossed the weapon onto the pile. "Chato left his rearguard," Sample said. "He considers the back door locked. We possess a clear path to his staging ground." "The door stands open," Kano agreed. "But the host knows we stand in the hallway." Kano held up the satellite radio. "The gunner carried this on his belt," Kano said. "Encrypted channel. Direct line to the command vehicle." "You made a call." "The radio chirped," Kano corrected. Chato requested a status update. He heard the explosions down in the pass. He demanded confirmation of your death. Sample felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. "You answered." I keyed the microphone. Kano turned the radio off. The green glow vanished, plunging them back into the moonlight. I offered 0 words. I held the microphone near the gunner's face while his heart pumped the last of his blood onto the limestone. "You fed him the audio of a man drowning in his own blood." "I fed him the reality of his situation," Kano said. He stood up. He tucked the captured radio into a pouch on his chest rig. "Chato understands the message. The ghosts refuse to die. The ghosts climb the walls." Sample looked at the western horizon. The stars began to blur. A thick brown haze gathered on the edge of the earth, blotting out the moonlight. The wind picked up, howling across the flat mesa, carrying the sharp scent of pulverized dust and static electricity. "He runs scared now," Kano said. "A scared man makes mistakes. A scared man pushes his machines too hard." "He holds 2 children," Sample said. He pointed toward the gathering haze in the west. "A scared man with hostages eliminates his liabilities." Kano followed Sample's gaze. The tracker read the atmospheric shift. He recognized the threat building on the horizon. "We need transport," Sample said. "We left our trucks boiling in the canyon. This mesa stretches for 20 miles. "The scouts mentioned a rally point," Kano said. He pointed to a faint set of tire tracks cutting across the hardpan, heading straight into the approaching storm. Chato maintains a fleet of ATVs and light vehicles at a secondary stash house near the anvil. We follow these tracks. Sample slung his rifle. The wind whipped his canvas jacket against his sides. The grit in the air intensified, stinging his exposed skin. We follow the tracks into that, Sample said. The earth rises up to meet us, Kano said. The tracker started walking west, his boots crunching over the limestone. They know you come for them, Grey Wolf. Now we see if they survived the storm. Time of Wrath. Chapter 14. The horizon vanished. The brown haze swallowed the stars and consumed the pale moonlight. A West Texas haboob provides zero warning and offers zero mercy. It arrives as a 2,000-foot wall of pulverized topsoil, a moving mountain of red grit pushed across the caprock by a 60-mile-per-hour sheer wind. Mercer Sample pulled the collar of his canvas jacket up. He tied a blue cotton bandana over his nose and mouth. The air turned into coarse sandpaper. He felt the static electricity build in the atmosphere, a dry, crackling energy that danced across the aluminum handguard of his Daniel defense rifle. Small blue sparks popped against the metal. He looked at Kano. The tracker possessed zero protection for his flayed scalp. The flying sand hit the raw tissue and exposed bone like birdshot. Kano lowered his chin to his chest. He kept his single eye slitted against the abrasive wind. He marched forward, a broken automaton wrapped in tactical nylon, his boots dragging in the dirt. He found the compressed ruts of the ATV tracks by feel alone, reading the density of the earth through the thick rubber soles of his danners. Visibility dropped to 5 feet. The world outside that 5-foot bubble ceased to exist. The wind roared with the deafening thrust of a commercial jet turbine, erasing all tactical awareness. A cartel hit squad could stand 10 paces away, and Sample would never see the muzzle flashes or hear the gunshots. Sample unclipped the Garmin GPS unit from his chest rig. The backlit screen cut a weak green circle in the swirling red fog. He grabbed Kano by the shoulder, pulling the tracker close. He pressed his mouth against the side of Kano's head, right next to the ragged edge of the missing ear. The wind fills the ruts. Sample yelled. He tasted the iron-rich dust coating his teeth. We lose the trail. Kano leaned his head back. The dust mixed with the weeping blood and the crust of bourbon on his skull, forming a thick dark paste over his ruined features. The mesa acts as a funnel, Kano shouted over the gale. The storm pushes east. The tracks lead west. We walk straight into the teeth of the wind. We stay on the path. The anvil sits at the end of the funnel. GPS shows an elevation spike 2 miles out, Sample said. A massive structural anomaly. Flat top. Steep sides. The anvil, Kano confirmed. Chato parks his fleet at the base. They resumed the march. The physical exertion demanded massive amounts of oxygen. The atmosphere offered suffocating dust. Sample focused on the mechanics of breathing. Inhale through the cotton fabric. Filter the grit. Exhale. Repeat. He kept his left hand clamped onto the grab handle of Kano's tactical harness, tethering himself to the tracker. Separation in a haboob guaranteed a slow, agonizing demise. A disconnected man walks in circles until dehydration and the desert reclaim him. They pushed through the red wall for an hour. Every step required conscious effort. The wind battered their bodies, attempting to push them back toward the edge of the canyon. Sample kept his finger indexed above the Geisel trigger of the V7. He relied on pure primal instinct. The advanced optics mounted on the rifle offered zero utility. He flipped the cover off the Night Force scope and peered through the glass. The lenses captured a swirling vortex of static white noise. Kano stumbled. The tracker's left knee buckled. He pitched forward into the dirt. Sample hauled back on the harness, arresting Kano's fall before the man face-planted into the abrasive earth. He dragged Kano behind a shallow outcropping of limestone that offered a temporary windbreak. The dust eddied around them, pooling in the depression. Kano spat a mouthful of red mud onto the rocks. He leaned his back against the stone, his chest heaving. His single eye stared into the chaos, tracking variables Sample could not perceive. "Your body quits," Sample said. "My muscles require glucose," Kano rasped. The gravel in his voice deepened, scraped raw by the inhaled dirt. "My brain requires oxygen. My will remains intact." Sample reached into his dump pouch. He extracted a crushed foil packet. A high-calorie, military-issue energy gel. He tore the top off with his teeth and handed it to the tracker. "Consume the calories," Sample ordered. "We hit the anvil in under a mile." You face Chato with shaking hands. He takes your other eye. Kano squeezed the thick, synthetic paste into his mouth. He swallowed the gel without chewing. He dropped the foil wrapper into the wind. The storm snatched it away instantly. "The wind shifts," Kano said. Sample checked the compass on his GPS. The heading remains constant. Due west. "The wind shifts," Kano repeated. He pressed the palm of his hand against the dirt. The airflow hits a solid object ahead. It bounces back. A large object. Metal and glass. Sample holstered the GPS. He brought the rifle up, tucking the stock tight into his shoulder pocket. He trusted Kano's sensory processing over the digital satellites. The tracker operated on a frequency tuned to the violent rhythm of the Caprock. Sample stood up, stepping out of the protective shadow of the limestone outcropping. The gale hit him in the chest, threatening to knock him backward. He swept the muzzle of the V7 through the 5-foot bubble of visibility. Red dust. Swirling chaos. Then the smell hit him. The scent cut through the iron and the ozone of the haboob. A heavy, chemical odor. Combusted diesel fuel and hot synthetic oil. Sample dropped to one knee. He grabbed Kano's harness. "Engines," Sample whispered. The wind stole the word, but Kano read the posture. The tracker drew his Glock 17. He utilized his left hand to brace his right wrist, stabilizing the weapon against the tremors racking his exhausted muscles. A shape solidified in the red fog dead ahead. It manifested as a darker shade of crimson, a massive blocky silhouette blocking the wind. A heavy grille. A reinforced steel bumper. An armored Chevrolet Suburban. The engine idled. The headlights remained off to maintain operational security in the storm, but the heat radiating from the massive block warped the dust clouds around the hood. Sample read the tactical situation in a microsecond. They did not reach the secondary stash house. They walked straight into the tail end of Chato's convoy. The cartel boss halted his vehicles, unwilling to risk driving the heavy armor off a mesa edge in zero visibility. They stumbled into the rear guard. A heavy metal door clicked open somewhere in the swirling dust to their right. The sound of a man coughing hacked through the roar of the wind. Sample raised the Daniel defense rifle. Kano thumbed the safety off his Glock. They knelt together in the dirt, surrounded by a blind, mechanical herd, waiting for the red fog to reveal the face of the enemy. Time of Wrath. Chapter 15. The flame of a Zippo lighter flared in the red vortex. It cast a harsh, yellow sphere of light against the swirling grit. The cartel soldier stood 3 feet from the rear bumper of the armored Suburban. He cupped his hands around a cheap cigarette, prioritizing a nicotine fix over tactical awareness. The wind snatched the smoke the instant he exhaled. Mercer Sample brought the Daniel Defense V7 to his shoulder. He laid the crosshairs on the man's chest. Kano placed a bloody hand over the muzzle of the rifle. The tracker shook his head. He pushed past Sample, stepping into the howling wind. Kano materialized from the dust, like a flayed demon. He closed the gap in 3 silent strides. He drove his left hand forward, clamping his fingers over the smoker's mouth and nose. The man's eyes went wide. He dropped the lighter. Kano brought the jagged brown glass down in a brutal arc. He buried the serrated edge deep into the soft tissue beneath the man's jawline, severing the vocal cords and the carotid artery in a single tearing motion. The soldier thrashed, his boots kicking the loose caliche. Kano rode the spasms, dragging the dying weight backward into the blinding storm. He laid the corpse in the dirt. He vanished back into the red fog. The passenger door of the Suburban clicked open. A second man leaned out of the cab. He peered into the localized chaos of the hubbub. Marco? Que diablos haces? Sample squeezed the Geisel trigger. A single 5.56 round punched through the speaker's chest. The impact threw the man backward into the center console. The darkness exploded. The driver of the Suburban panicked. He slammed his foot on the accelerator. The heavy truck lurched forward, tires spinning and seeking traction in the deep dirt. The driver shoved the barrel of a compact AK-47 out the shattered passenger window. He held the trigger down, dumping 30 rounds of 7.62 ammunition into the storm. The muzzle flashes acted like a high-intensity strobe light. The staccato bursts of fire illuminated the microscopic particles of flying dirt. The hubbub transformed into a chaotic disco of violence. Stop-motion snapshots of red dust and flying brass. Sample dropped to his stomach. Bullets snapped the air inches above his head, the supersonic cracks rivaling the roar of the wind. He tracked the origin of the flashes. He fired 3 measured shots into the driver's side door, hunting the engine block and the driver's legs through the steel plating. Ahead of them, deeper in the dust, heavy weapons answered the noise. Chato's main force heard the gunfire. They possessed 0 visibility. They assumed an ambush from the rear flank. They reacted with absolute undisciplined volume, laying down a suppressing fire directly into their own rear guard. Green tracer rounds cut horizontal lines through the red fog. A heavy .50 caliber machine gun began a rhythmic, deafening pound. The massive projectiles tore through the empty space, ripping the roof off the abandoned Suburban and shredding the metal like aluminum foil. They kill each other, Kano shouted. He pressed his back against the rear tire of the ruined truck. Let them work, Sample yelled back. A stray tracer round found the Suburban's ruptured fuel tank. A spark ignited the vapor. The subsequent explosion pushed the dust away for a fraction of a second. A localized vacuum of clear air formed, illuminated by a towering pillar of orange flame. The concussion hit Sample in the chest, stealing his breath. The firelight revealed the stage. 50 yards away, the lead vehicle sat parked at the base of a massive vertical cliff. The Anvil. A man stood on the tailgate of the F-550 flatbed. He wore a silver-studded tactical belt and a custom chest rig over a black shirt. He possessed the magnetic, terrifying energy of a predator enjoying the slaughter. He shouted orders, slapping the helmet of the man operating the heavy machine gun, directing the fire. Chato. He held a human shield. A little girl stood in front of him. She wore a faded denim jacket. The left breast pocket hung loose, missing a mother-of-pearl button. Her pale face reflected the firelight. She did not cry. She stared into the inferno with hollow, exhausted eyes. Chato kept a massive hand clamped onto her shoulder. Sample raised the Daniel Defense V7. He ignored the flying shrapnel. He ignored the roaring wind. He brought the Night Force optic to his eye. He placed the illuminated red dot square on the bridge of Chato's nose. He initiated the trigger pull. 3 pounds of pressure. Chato saw the reflection of the fire on the optic lens. The cartel boss did not dive for cover. He bared his teeth, a feral smile in the orange glow. He grabbed the collar of the denim jacket. He hauled the little girl upward, placing her skull directly between his own face and the barrel of the hidden rifle. Sample froze. He released the trigger. Chato stepped backward. He vanished off the tailgate, dragging the girl into the safety of the armored flatbed. The wind rushed back in, filling the vacuum. The haboob swallowed the firelight, returning the world to a blinding, swirling red nightmare. Sample lowered the rifle. He tasted blood. He bit the inside of his cheek to stop his finger from completing the pull. "He expects you to take the shot," Kano said. The tracker crawled through the dirt, arriving at Sample's side. The orange glow of the burning Suburban cast shifting shadows across Kano's ruined face. "He evaluates your morality. He calculates your weakness." "I refuse to shoot a child," Sample said. "He counts on that refusal," Kano replied. "He builds his armor out of your conscience." The heavy gunfire died down. The cartel shooters realized they fired upon their own burning wreckage. The commanders screamed for a ceasefire. The engines of the surviving vehicles roared, the superchargers whining over the gale. The convoy began a slow, grinding ascent up a steep, invisible path. "They climbed the anvil," Sample said. He checked the magazine in his rifle. 15 rounds left. "They drive up the main road," Kano corrected. He stood up, ignoring the gale threatening to knock him back into the dirt. "They guard the front door with heavy armor. They hold the high ground. A frontal assault guarantees a massacre. We require an alternative route." "We take the spirit path," Kano said. He pointed a bloody finger into the howling void, toward the sheer, vertical face of the mesa. "We climb the back." Time of Wrath. Chapter 16. The haboob died a sudden, unnatural death. The violent sheer wind lost its atmospheric pressure and collapsed. The roaring silence that followed hit the eardrums with the physical weight of a deep ocean dive. Gravity reclaimed the millions of tons of pulverized topsoil suspended in the air. The red dirt fell like heavy, suffocating snow, burying the desert floor under a fresh 2-inch blanket of absolute stillness. Mercer Sample untied the blue cotton bandana from his face. He spat a thick paste of mud and saliva onto the ground. He operated the charging handle of the Daniel Defense V7. He pulled the bolt carrier group to the rear, inspecting the chamber. A fine layer of red grit coated the lubricated metal. Tight tolerances define modern combat rifles. Sand destroys tight tolerances. He wiped the bolt face with his thumb, slapped the forward assist, and seated the round. The weapon felt like a time bomb in his hands. "We breathe again," Kano said. The tracker stood up from the shallow depression where they rode out the final minutes of the storm. The wind had scoured the fresh blood from his face, leaving a terrifying canvas of raw pink tissue and jagged scabs. He looked less human than the surrounding rocks. Sample looked west. The sky cleared, revealing a brilliant cold canopy of stars and a waxing moon. The pale light illuminated their destination. The anvil dominated the horizon. A geological freak of nature. 1 billion tons of limestone, iron ore, and compressed shale thrust upward from the basin floor. The sheer vertical walls rose 800 feet, forming a massive flat-top fortress. It resembled a dreadnought stranded in a sea of dead earth, indifferent to the centuries of wind and water grinding against its hull. "The old Comanches called it the stepping stone to the sky," Kano said. He stared at the monolith. They pushed their captives off the edge to test the aerodynamics of the human soul. "Chato tests modern ballistics," Sample said. Sample pointed toward the eastern flank of the mesa. A single ribbon of asphalt scarred the cliff face, a steep switchback road carved by petroleum prospectors 50 years ago. Halogen work lights blazed at the base of the incline. The cartel brought portable generators. The harsh white glare washed out the starlight, creating a perimeter of absolute daylight. Sample raised the Night Force optic to his eye. He dialed the magnification to maximum. "Read the defense," Kano requested. "They construct a fatal funnel," Sample said, describing the scene passing through the crosshairs. Two armored Suburbans parked nose to nose across the asphalt. A wall of Detroit steel. They piled sandbags on the hoods. Heavy weapons? A belt-fed M240 machine gun rests on the sandbags. Another man holds a shoulder-fired rocket tube. They placed concrete highway barriers on the shoulders to prevent off-road flanking. They possess overlapping fields of fire. Sample lowered the rifle. He looked at the tracker. A full tactical team with close air support takes heavy casualties breaching that checkpoint, Sample said. 2 men on foot walking up that road equal 2 corpses baking on the asphalt. Chato locks the front door, Kano agreed. He expects us to knock. He wants the noise. You promised a back door. Kano turned his single eye away from the halogen glare. He faced the northern wall of the anvil. The side cast an absolute, impenetrable shadow. Decades ago, a telecommunications company tried to bounce microwave signals across the Caprock, Kano said. They required elevation. They lacked the budget to carve a second road. They utilized the northern cliff face. Kano started walking. His limp possessed a mechanical, rhythmic quality now, a permanent alteration to his gait. Sample followed, letting the tracker navigate the treacherous, boulder-strewn terrain at the base of the mesa. They kept a mile of distance between themselves and the cartel checkpoint, slipping through the deep shadows cast by the anvil. The temperature plummeted, the desert bleeding its accumulated heat into the clear night sky. Sample felt the exhaustion seeping into his bone marrow. He operated on scavenged adrenaline and zero sleep. The muscles in his legs burned with a dull, persistent ache. He pushed the pain into a mental box and locked the lid. The little girl with the pearl buttons possessed 0 boxes for her terror. They rounded a massive spine of jutting limestone. Kano stopped. He pointed a dirt-caked finger upward. Sample followed the gesture. A rusted lattice of angular steel clung to the vertical rock face. It looked like a skeletal metallic spine bolted directly into the limestone, rising straight up into the darkness. A communications relay tower, anchored to the cliff to cheat the wind. The spirit path, Kano said. Sample approached the base of the structure. The metal smelled of oxidized iron and ancient grease. Thick steel cables pinned the tower to the rock, secured by massive hex head bolts driven deep into the stone. He found the access point. A vertical maintenance shaft ran up the center of the lattice framework. A steel cage enclosed a rusted ladder, designed to prevent technicians from falling outward. 800 feet of vertical climbing, Sample said. He grabbed the lowest rung of the ladder. He tested the integrity. Flakes of rust broke off, dusting his knuckles. The metal groaned, but held. The safety cage stops a fall backward. It fails to stop a fall downward. The cage confines the body, Kano said. It traps the climber. A man with a rifle across his back wedges tight in the metal. Sample calculated the dimensions. The tracker spoke the truth. The steel hoop of the safety cage measured 2 feet across. The Daniel Defense V7 and his tactical rig required more clearance. He faced the prospect of climbing a rusted ladder into the sky, trapped inside a steel tube, unable to deploy his weapon if he encountered resistance. Chato knows this tower exists, Sample said. Chato ignores history, Kano replied. He touched the rusted steel of the cage. He considers himself a visionary. Visionaries look forward. They never look down. He leaves it unguarded. He trusts the corrosion. He trusts the altitude. He considers the climb a suicide mission for an injured man and an exhausted lawman. Kano turned his ruined face toward Sample. He underestimates the motivation. Sample unslung the V7. He evaluated his gear. He possessed the rifle, 3 spare magazines, the Glock 17 on his hip, and the clothes on his back. He popped the takedown pins on the AR-15. He separated the upper receiver from the lower receiver. He stuffed the 2 halves of the dismantled rifle deep into the canvas pockets of his jacket, zipping it tight. The awkward bulk pressed against his ribs, but it eliminated the weapon's profile. "I climb unarmed," Sample said. "You climb light," Kano corrected. Kano stepped to the base of the ladder. He possessed 0 tactical gear to snag. He carried the Glock in his waistband and the jagged bottle glass in his chest pouch. He reached up. He gripped the 3rd rung with both hands. "The wind increases near the top," Kano warned. "The metal vibrates. The bolts scream. Ignore the noise. Focus on the hands. Focus on the boots." Kano pulled himself off the desert floor. He entered the steel cage. Sample watched the tracker ascend the first 10 feet, the dark tactical clothing blending with the rusted iron and the black rock. The man moved on pure, unadulterated hatred. Sample stepped into the cage. He grabbed the cold, rough steel. He placed his boot on the bottom rung. He left the desert floor behind and started the long crawl to the devil's staging ground. Time of Wrath. Chapter 17. Rust flakes fell like coarse rain inside the steel tube. Mercer Sample tasted the iron oxide on his tongue. He kept his head tilted down to protect his eyes from the debris kicked loose by Kano's boots directly above him. The tracker climbed with the relentless, mechanical rhythm of a piston. Hand. Foot. Pull. Push. 400 feet of empty air separated them from the desert floor. 400 feet of dark vertical stone stretched above them. The wind off the Caprock intensified at this altitude. It screamed through the rusted lattice of the microwave tower, a high-pitched vibrating howl that vibrated the metal rungs straight through the thick rubber soles of Sample's boots. The entire structure swayed. It leaned out over the void, straining against the massive hex head bolts anchoring the steel to the limestone. Sample ignored the sway. He ignored the drop. He focused entirely on a 3-foot section of the ladder. Lactic acid flooded his forearms. His grip strength led away with every upward pull. The dismantled halves of the Daniel defense rifle dug into his ribs, the sharp edges of the Picatinny rails bruising the muscle beneath his canvas jacket. The bolts groan, Kano's voice floated down, barely audible over the gale. "They hold," Sample grunted. He reached up, his leather gloves finding the next rung. The steel felt like a block of dry ice. "The Comanches called this the middle air," Kano said. He did not pause his ascent. "The place where the earth relinquishes its claim, but the sky refuses to grant entry. You exist as a ghost here. I prefer the dirt." Sample pulled his body weight up. His right calf muscle cramped, a hard, agonizing knot twisting the fibers. He locked his knee, forcing the spasm to ride out. He breathed through the sharp spike of pain, sucking the thin, cold oxygen into his burning lungs. He looked up. Kano's dark silhouette blocked the stars. The tracker operated outside the boundaries of human physiology. Blood loss and shock dictated Kano should lie comatose in a hospital bed. Instead, hatred fueled the man, a dark, combustible energy burning brighter than the halogen work lights illuminating the cartel checkpoint a mile away. Sample reached for the next rung with his left hand. He wrapped his leather glove around the steel cylinder. He committed his body weight. The weld snapped. A sharp, metallic crack echoed inside the safety cage. The left side of the rung tore free from the vertical rail. Sample's left hand plunged downward. The sudden shift in momentum ripped his right hand off the ladder. Both boots slipped from their purchase. Gravity reclaimed him instantly. He dropped. The heavy canvas of his jacket caught the rusted steel hoops of the safety cage. The friction slowed his descent for a fraction of a second, tearing the fabric and grinding against his shoulders, but the cage possessed 0 horizontal bars to arrest a vertical plunge. He stared up at the rectangle of stars shrinking above him. He anticipated the sickening rush of free fall. A hand shot out of the darkness. Fingers clamped around the thick collar of Sample's canvas jacket. The grip locked down like the jaws of an industrial vice. The plunge ended with a violent, spine-snapping jerk. Sample hung suspended inside the steel tube. The wind battered his legs, spinning his lower body. He slammed against the metal grating of the cage. He looked up. Kano hung from the ladder by his left arm, his boot wedged into the corner of a rung. His right arm extended straight down, holding Sample's entire 200-pound weight, plus the dismantled rifle and tactical gear. The muscles in Kano's right shoulder bunched and corded, threatening to tear straight through his tactical shirt. The tendons in his neck stood out like steel cables. "Find the steel," Kano roared over the wind. Sample kicked wildly in the dark. His right boot found a solid rung. He drove his weight onto the leg, relieving the tension on Kano's arm. He reached up with both hands, bypassing the broken rung, and locked his fingers around the cold iron above. Kano released the collar. The tracker's arm dropped to his side, shaking violently from the massive exertion. Sample clung to the ladder, his chest heaving, his heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against his ribs. He stared at the tracker. Kano's ruined face hung inches away. The man possessed 0 right to harbor that level of physical strength. "You violate the laws of physics," Sample gasped. "I refuse to let the anvil take my kill," Kano said. The tracker turned back to the ladder. He gripped the steel. 200 feet. The cage ends at a maintenance platform. They resumed the climb. The pace slowed. Sample tested every weld before committing his weight. The cold seeped through his gloves, numbing his fingers. He operated on pure mechanical repetition, forcing his battered body to conquer the remaining distance. The vertical shaft ended. Sample's head cleared the top hoop of the safety cage. He stared across a platform constructed of heavy steel grating. The wind whipped across the flat surface, carrying the sharp scent of combusted diesel and hot oil. Kano lay flat on the grating, his chest pressed against the metal, peering over the edge of a low concrete retaining wall. Sample hauled himself onto the platform. He lay beside the tracker, his muscles twitching, demanding rest he refused to provide. He unzipped his canvas jacket. He pulled the upper and lower receivers of the Daniel defense rifle from his pockets. He aligned the pivot pins and snapped the weapon back together. The metallic click sounded loud on the silent mesa. He slapped a fresh magazine into the magwell and chambered a round. He crawled to the retaining wall. He looked over the concrete lip. The anvil stretched out before them, a massive flat expanse of baked rock. Chato utilized the isolated plateau precisely as Kano predicted. It served as a militarized motor pool. 50 yards from the maintenance platform, a fleet of vehicles sat parked in neat tactical rows. 3 customized Polaris ATVs with mounted weapon racks. 2 stripped-down dune buggies built for high-speed desert running. Beyond the light vehicles, the heavy armor idled. The surviving black Suburbans and the Ford F-550 flatbed from the canyon ambush sat parked near the center of the mesa. Halogen lights mounted on portable tripods illuminated the staging ground. A dozen cartel soldiers moved between the trucks, shouting orders, checking ammunition crates, and treating the wounded. They prepared to abandon the heavy trucks and transition to the agile ATVs for the final run to the Mexican border. Sample focused the Night Force optic on the F-550 supply truck. He found the prize. 2 small figures sat huddled against the massive steel cargo box on the flatbed bed. A boy and a girl. They sat shoulder to shoulder, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. The boy stared at his boots. The girl stared at the halogen lights, her pale face a mask of absolute frozen trauma. The missing pearl button on her denim jacket caught the harsh glare. Sample lowered the rifle. He looked at Kano. They transition their cargo, Sample said. They load the children onto the buggies. They split the cash between the ATVs. They vanish into the deep desert before sunrise. Kano drew his Glock 17. He checked the chamber. We break their legs, Kano said. The tracker pointed toward the edge of the vehicle staging area. A cluster of 50-gallon steel drums sat stacked near the Suburbans. Red hazard diamonds painted on the sides indicated the contents. High-octane aviation fuel for the buggies. They brought their own fire, Kano said. Sample checked the tactical geometry. They occupied the blind spot. The cartel soldiers focused their attention entirely on the eastern access road, trusting the checkpoint to hold back the world. They ignored the dark expanse of the mesa behind them. We ignite the fuel, Sample said. We create the chaos. I secure the children. You secure the devil. Kano traced the jagged edge of his bottle glass blade with a bloody thumb. The devil belongs to me, Kano said. They rose from the concrete wall, two ghosts stepping off the spirit path, ready to bring the wrath down upon the staging ground. Time of Wrath. Chapter 18. The aviation fuel smelled like cold money and raw chemical power. Mercer Sample unzipped the utility pouch on his chest rig. He extracted a 1 1/4 pound block of M112C4 plastic explosive. The olive drab wrapper felt slick in his gloved hands. He pulled a specialized pencil detonator from a separate loop. He handed the materials to Kano. You understand the fuse? Sample asked. Kano pressed his thumb into the soft gray clay, testing the density. I twist the brass cap. The chemical vial breaks. The acid eats the wire. I get 60 seconds. Give me 59, Sample said. He checked the chamber of his Daniel defense rifle. I need the distraction peaking when I grab the kids. Do not admire the artwork. Set it and walk away. I paint with fire tonight, Kano said. The tracker slipped over the concrete retaining wall. He vanished into the dark, a shadow sliding across the limestone plateau. Sample flanked the motor pool. He kept his profile low, utilizing the scattered boulders and rusted iron debris for cover. He reached a vantage point 30 yards from the Ford F-550 supply truck. The cartel soldiers remained oblivious. They operated under the assumption of absolute security. Two men stood near the stack of 50-gallon fuel drums, passing a silver flask back and forth. Another soldier leaned against the heavy steel bumper of the F-550. He held a customized AK-47 slung across his chest and tapped a rhythm on the truck fender with his knuckles. Bored. Complacent. The two children sat huddled against the cargo box on the flatbed. The boy rested his chin on his knees. The girl stared blankly at the halogen work lights. Sample laid the crosshairs of the Night Force optic on the guard's ear. He steadied his breathing. He waited for the acid to eat the wire. The stack of 50-gallon drums detonated. The blast produced zero cinematic fireball. It produced a localized earthquake. The sheer concussive force punched the air out of Sample's lungs and rattled his teeth in his skull. A blinding white flash bleached the mesa, turning the night into high noon for a fraction of a second. Then, the liquid fire arrived. Aviation fuel burns hot and fast. The ruptured steel drums vomited a tidal wave of flaming liquid across the staging ground. The wave washed under the row of parked Polaris ATVs and stripped-down dune buggies. The intense thermal radiation melted the synthetic fuel lines on the buggies in seconds. Secondary explosions racked the motor pool. Chaos consumed the cartel. The men near the drums vaporized. The surviving soldiers screamed. They abandoned their weapons and their discipline. They scrambled across the limestone, fleeing the spreading lake of fire. Black smoke billowed into the cold night air, choking the men and plunging the staging ground into a strobe-lit nightmare. One soldier made a fatal calculation. He sprinted to a black Suburban parked near the edge of the fire break. He yanked the heavy armored door open and climbed behind the wheel. He wanted to save the truck. He wanted to save the millions of dollars in shrink-wrapped currency packed inside the cargo area. He fired the engine and slammed the transmission into drive. He stomped the accelerator. Panic blinded his spatial awareness. He cut the steering wheel hard to the left to avoid a wall of flame. The 3-ton armored truck lunged forward, smashing broadside into a pair of burning ATVs. The impact locked the vehicles together in a tangled mass of flaming steel and melting rubber. The Suburban's tires spun, screaming against the slick limestone, seeking traction. It pushed the ATVs across the staging area, a bulldozer driving a wall of fire. They hit the edge of the anvil. The front wheels of the buggies dropped into the absolute void. The heavy Suburban followed, its own momentum dragging it over the lip of the cliff. Sample watched the mechanical stampede. 3 vehicles, joined in a fiery embrace, plummeted 800 feet into the black canyon below. They fell like a comet of burning steel. A massive, echoing crash signaled their arrival on the canyon floor seconds later. The guard near the children turned his back on his prisoners to watch the spectacle. Sample squeezed the Geisel trigger. The 5.56 round struck the guard in the base of the skull. The man dropped like a severed puppet, his face hitting the limestone with a wet thud. Sample broke cover. He sprinted toward the flatbed, stepping into the harsh, flickering glare of the burning motor pool. He ignored the secondary explosions popping off to his left. He ignored the cartel soldiers scattering in the smoke. He reached the back of the F-550. He vaulted onto the steel bed. The boy flinched, pulling his knees tight to his chest. The girl did not move. She stared at the rifle in Sample's hands. Sample slung the weapon across his back. He drew a specialized rescue hook from his tactical vest, a curved steel blade with a blunted tip designed to slice seatbelts and zip ties without cutting flesh. "Turn around," Sample commanded. His voice offered zero comfort. He issued an order. The boy obeyed, presenting his bound wrists. Sample hooked the thick plastic zip tie and yanked. The plastic snapped. He moved to the girl. She turned. He severed her restraints. "We leave now," Sample said. He grabbed the boy by the collar of his shirt and hoisted him off the truck bed, dropping him onto the limestone. He grabbed the girl and lowered her next to the boy. A shadow separated itself from the smoke rolling across the mesa. A man stepped into the firelight. He wore a silver-studded tactical belt and a black shirt. He held a customized, short-barreled shotgun. Chato. The cartel boss surveyed the ruins of his empire. His armored fleet burned. His men fled. His millions of dollars lay scattered at the bottom of the Caprock. He locked his eyes on Sample and the children. He raised the shotgun. "You burn my house," Chato said. The Sinaloan accent cut through the roar of the flames. "I collect the toll in blood." Sample reached for his Glock 17. A second shadow dropped from the roof of the F-550 cab. Kano landed directly behind Chato. The tracker moved with the absolute silence of a falling stone. He wrapped his left arm around Chato's neck, locking the cartel boss in a chokehold. Kano brought his right hand up. The jagged piece of brown bottle glass caught the light of the burning ATVs. "You forget to check your blind spots," Kano whispered into Chato's ear. Time of Wrath. Chapter 19. Chato understood the mechanics of close-quarters slaughter. He felt the jagged edge press against his carotid artery. He felt the dark, wet breath of the tracker on his neck. He calculated the geometry of survival in a microsecond. He did not freeze. He dropped his center of gravity. Chato drove the heavy polymer stock of his customized shotgun backward with piston-like force. The hard plastic struck Kano dead center in the sternum. Ribs cracked. The impact expelled the air from the tracker's lungs in a violent rush. The glass scraper slipped. Instead of severing the artery, the serrated edge carved a shallow, bloody trench across Chato's collarbone. Chato spun on his heel. He swung the short barrel of the shotgun like a baseball bat. The steel caught Kano across the jaw. The tracker's head snapped back. He collapsed against the massive rear tire of the Ford F-550, his Glock clattering onto the limestone. Mercer Sample raised his pistol. The mesa erupted. The pool of burning aviation fuel reached the perimeter of the motor pool. It found the dry scrub brush and dead cedar blanketing the eastern half of the anvil. Decades of dead vegetation ignited in a single, roaring intake of breath. A wall of flame shot 30 feet into the cold night sky. The thermal updraft created its own weather system, sucking the oxygen out of the surrounding air. The temperature on the plateau spiked 20 degrees in 10 seconds. The limestone baked, transforming the flat expanse into a literal skillet. "Move!" Sample yelled. He grabbed the boy by the collar. He pushed the girl forward. They abandoned the shadow of the flatbed. The steel deck of the truck warped and groaned under the intense thermal radiation. Sample kept his body positioned between the children and the inferno. His canvas jacket began to smoke. The heat dried his eyes, forcing him to blink rapidly to clear the stinging sweat. Total panic consumed the cartel soldiers. The men who survived the initial blast realized the truth of their geography. The blazing scrub brush and the tangled mass of burning Suburbans severed the eastern access road. The fire blocked the only asphalt route down from the anvil. Discipline vanished. Survival instinct took the wheel. Men charged the flames, seeking the switchbacks. The intense heat repelled them. They threw their arms over their faces, stumbling backward, their tactical vests catching fire. They scrambled across the baking rock like trapped insects, seeking a cold corner that did not exist. A soldier emerged from the thick black smoke, 10 yards to Sample's right. The man carried an AR-15. He possessed zero tactical focus. He ran blind, choking on the toxic fumes of melting tires. He saw the American shielding the two captives. He raised his rifle out of pure terrified reflex. Sample fired twice. Center mass. The hollow point rounds dropped the soldier into a patch of burning cedar. He did not rise. Sample holstered the Glock and unslung the Daniel Defense V7. He needed the volume of fire. Ammunition cooked off inside the burning trucks, sending stray bullets whizzing through the smoke. The mesa turned into a random, chaotic shooting gallery. "Keep your eyes on my back," Sample told the girl. "Ignore the noise. Ignore the heat." She nodded. Her pale face reflected the orange glow. She gripped the boy's hand, pulling him along. They possessed a resilience Sample rarely saw in seasoned combat veterans. He swept the rifle muzzle across the swirling smoke. He searched for Kano. The tracker pushed himself off the baking limestone. Kano spat a mouthful of blood and broken teeth. He ignored his fractured ribs. He scooped his dropped Glock from the dirt. Chato retreated from the spreading fire. The cartel boss commanded 2 surviving lieutenants. They formed a wedge, pushing south away from the burning scrub. The edge. Kano yelled over the roar of the fire. The tracker pointed a bloody finger toward the southern rim of the mesa. The wind pushes the flames east. The south rim stays clear. "We trap ourselves," Sample shouted back. "We put 800 feet of empty air at our backs." "We survived the next 3 minutes," Kano countered. "The fire eats the oxygen here." Sample felt the thick rubber soles of his boots softening against the rock. The air turned toxic. They required distance from the fuel source. He herded the children south. They navigated a labyrinth of shifting heat and black smoke. The roar of the fire drowned out all other sound. A Polaris ATV exploded 50 yards away, sending a shower of burning shrapnel raining down across their path. Sample threw his canvas jacket over the kids, taking the brunt of the falling debris on his own shoulders. Hot metal burned through his denim shirt, searing the skin beneath. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward. They reached the southern rim. The air felt 10 degrees cooler on the precipice. The updraft from the canyon floor provided a steady stream of breathable oxygen. The drop offered absolute darkness, a sheer vertical plunge into the void. Sample pushed the children behind a low, jagged outcrop of limestone near the edge. "Stay low," Sample ordered. "Press your faces to the rock." He turned back to the mesa. The fire cast long, dancing shadows across the plateau. The anvil burned, a beacon of destruction visible for 50 miles across the West Texas basin. Chato stood 20 yards away. The cartel boss held his ground near the rim. The fire illuminated his face. He possessed zero fear. He radiated pure, unfiltered rage. His empire lay in ashes. His soldiers burned. The 2 ghosts he dismissed as dead men dismantled his operation in a single night. His 2 lieutenants flanked him. They held customized assault rifles. They looked cornered and lethal. Kano stepped out of the smoke. The tracker stood 10 yards from the cartel boss. Kano's face resembled a butcher's block. He held his Glock in his right hand. He offered 0 words. He simply stared at the man who took his eye. Sample stepped up beside the tracker. He raised the V7. The fire roared. The heat pressed against their backs. The devil and the ghosts occupied the final sliver of cold rock on the anvil. "You bring the fire," Chato yelled over the inferno. He pumped the action of his shotgun, chambering a heavy slug. "I bring the gravity." Time of wrath. Chapter 20. Chato pulled the trigger. The 1-ounce lead slug shattered the limestone barrier inches from Mercer Sample's face. Shrapnel tore through the canvas jacket, biting deep into Sample's shoulder. The roar of the shotgun blast rivaled the roaring inferno behind them. Sample shoved the children flat against the rock. He brought the Daniel Defense V7 to his shoulder. He squeezed the Geisel trigger. The firing pin struck an empty chamber. The bolt locked to the rear. He possessed 0.5.56 ammunition. He discarded the useless plastic and aluminum, letting the rifle clatter onto the stone. The 2 cartel lieutenants flanked their boss. They raised their customized AR-15s, searching for targets through the shifting black smoke. Kano broke cover. The tracker charged straight into the muzzle flashes. The lieutenant on the left fired a 3-round burst. The projectiles punched through Kano's chest rig, striking flesh and bone with heavy, meaty impacts. Kano ignored the terminal trauma. He reached a crumbled concrete footing near the cliff edge. He gripped a 4-foot length of rusted rebar protruding from the rubble. He snapped the iron free with a brutal twist of his shoulders. He closed the distance. He drove the jagged rebar through the first lieutenant's sternum, pinning the man to the limestone. The second lieutenant pivoted, aiming his rifle at Kano's head. Kano swung his Glock 17 like a hammer. The heavy polymer frame crushed the lieutenant's orbital bone. The man staggered backward, his boots slipping on the slick rock. He fell over the edge of the anvil, vanishing into the black void. Kano collapsed. His lungs filled with blood. He dropped the pistol. Sample drew his own Glock. He aimed at Chato. He fired his last 3 rounds. Chato ducked behind a limestone pillar. The hollow points chipped the rock, showering the cartel boss in white dust. Chato stepped out, leveling the shotgun. He fired. The blast caught Sample's right hand. The impact stripped the Glock from his grip, sending the weapon spinning into the darkness. Sample felt a blinding flare of pain. His fingers went numb, dripping crimson onto his boots. Chato racked the shotgun slide. The empty plastic shell ejected, bouncing on the stone. "You die in the dirt," Chato said. Sample refused the execution. He dropped his center of gravity. He lunged forward, launching his entire body weight across the 10 feet of open rock. He drove his good shoulder into Chato's midsection. The impact folded the cartel boss in half. The shotgun fired into the sky. Momentum carried both men backward, a tangle of desperate limbs and raw adrenaline. The flat limestone vanished beneath their boots. The 800-foot abyss opened to receive them. They achieved free fall. Sample threw his arms out, a blind thrash against the void. His leather gloves slapped the jagged lip of the mesa. His left hand found a deep fissure. His fingers locked into the stone like steel pitons. His right arm hung useless, slick with his own blood. The sudden stop wrenched his left shoulder socket, tearing cartilage and muscle. Chato grasped at the empty night air. He found zero purchase. Sample watched the man fall. Chato produced zero sound. The darkness swallowed the cartel king whole, a silent descent into the Caprock Canyon. Sample hung over the drop. He ground his teeth together. He swung his right leg, finding a narrow shelf of rock. He pushed. He hauled his battered torso over the lip, collapsing onto the flat mesa. He lay on his back, staring at the smoke blotting out the stars. He forced his lungs to process oxygen. He rolled onto his side. He crawled toward the concrete footing. Kano lay on the stone. The tracker stared upward, his single eye fixed on the sky. A pool of dark blood spread beneath his shattered chest. Sample knelt beside him. "The debt clears," Kano whispered. The gravel in his voice smoothed out into a wet, shallow rattle. "The ghosts go back to sleep." The tracker stopped breathing. Sample closed Kano's single eye. He stood up. The inferno on the eastern half of the plateau burned itself down to glowing red embers. The wind died to a gentle breeze. Sample walked to the children. The boy sat with his arms wrapped around the girl. They stared at the blood coating Sample's jacket. "We walk," Sample said. He led them toward the southern switchback road. The fire missed this path. The descent required an hour of agonizing, deliberate movement. Sample carried the girl in his left arm, guiding the boy with his injured right hand. They reached the canyon floor as the sun breached the horizon. The dawn turned the eastern sky a pale bruised yellow. They found the black Ram TRX parked under the limestone overhang, exactly where Kano abandoned it during the sniper ambush. Dust coated the hood, but the machine remained untouched by the chaos above. Sample opened the passenger door. He lifted the girl into the premium leather seat. He lifted the boy up beside her. "Buckle the belts," Sample instructed. He closed the door. He walked around to the driver's side. He paused, looking back at the anvil. The mesa loomed against the morning sky, a black altar dominating the wasteland. Chato lay broken at its base. Kano rested under the sky. The Caprock settled the balance. Sample climbed behind the steering wheel. He hit the push button, ignition. The supercharger whined, a mechanical beast waking in the quiet canyon. He reached into his pocket with his left hand. His thumb traced the smooth round edges of the two mother-of-pearl buttons. Sample dropped the transmission into drive. He steered the truck east, guiding the survivors away from the wrath, driving toward the rising sun. The end.